Nobody warns you that royal life in the ancient world smelled like a luxury shop built directly beside a fish dock. One breath is cedar oil, myrrh, cinnamon, and hot beeswax. The next is sea salt, tar, rotting scales, damp rope, and a man carrying something in a basket that absolutely used to have eyes. And somewhere in the middle of all that, a woman will be remembered as a monster. Hey guys, tonight we begin with Jezebel. Not as a flat little villain cut out of somebody else's sermon, but as a woman stepping out of incense-heavy rooms and into a kingdom where the dust has opinions. We're going to walk through salt wind, purple dye, palace corridors, suspicious glances, and the exhausting fact that being royal in the ancient Near East was glamorous right up until you had to actually live there. So before you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Congratulations, you've just woken up on the eastern Mediterranean coast. The good news, you are in a palace. The bad news, the palace is full of smoke, servants, politics, and at least 3 people who can ruin your life before breakfast. The first thing you notice is the air. It comes in from the sea with a slap of salt and damp, pushing through shutters and rattling hanging cloths. Then it collides with indoor smells so thick you could probably fold them into a blanket. Frankincense, oil, heated metal, old stone, perfume, sweat, wine, fish, always fish. You sit up on a bed piled with woven fabric and cushions that look expensive enough to start a war over. They are not especially comfortable. Ancient luxury has a real talent for being visually impressive and physically annoying. Everything scratches, weighs too much, or smells faintly of the last person who used it. A servant moves quietly across the room with a bowl of water. Quietly, but not invisibly. Nobody in a palace is ever invisible, and nobody is ever alone. That is the first little gift of royalty. Even your eyelids have an audience. Outside, the city is already making noise like it took offense to dawn. Carts thud over packed earth. Dock workers shout. Someone is arguing in a courtyard with the confidence of a man who has never once considered using an indoor voice. Gulls scream overhead like unpaid critics. You go to the window, and there it is. Sidon. Bright water, ships with painted eyes on their prows, coils of rope, stacked timber, jars of oil, heaps of shellfish, baskets of grain, and bolts of cloth so rich in color they almost look rude. Purple cloth in particular, the famous kind, the kind stained out of tiny sea snails by people whose hands will never recover. And that smell again. Expensive and disgusting. Rich people in the ancient world really did insist on covering everything in perfume while standing 5 feet from a pile of fish guts. It is less elegant court and more high-end candle store attached to a very stressed harbour. Below you, workers crush, scrape, stir, and dye. Purple seeps into fingers, under nails, into every crease of skin. A royal city does not glitter by magic. It glitters because somebody nearby is exhausted, underpaid, and probably stained permanently maroon. You are in the world that produced Jezebel. Not a spooky painting, not a hissed name. A real princess from a place like this, where money arrives by ship, gods travel with merchants, and politics comes wrapped in cedar chests and marriage contracts. You can feel the training in the walls. This is a place where children of the palace learn early how to stand still, how to listen without looking like they are listening, and how to smile while someone rearranges their future. You do not get to be a king's daughter by being soft around the edges. You get polished, like ivory, beautiful, expensive, and one bad fall from broken. Servants begin the daily campaign of turning a person into royalty. Hair is oiled, linen is shaken out, jewelry is selected with life or death seriousness. Tiny pots are opened, powders, salves, perfumes. Everybody is dabbing, pinning, fastening, adjusting. It is the ancient equivalent of getting ready for an event when you know at least one person there hates you and another wants your chair. And it takes forever. This is one of the great scams of palace life. From a distance, it looks effortless. Up close, it is 2 hours of being tugged, laced, polished, and lightly suffocated. The necklace is stunning, also heavy enough to count as resistance training. Somewhere in these rooms, a royal daughter is learning what her life costs. She is learning that a marriage is not romance. It is shipping logistics with jewelry. One kingdom sends a woman. Another kingdom receives influence, trade, gods, expectations, trouble, and several trunks of embroidered linen. Then the arrangement starts moving inland. The sea air fades behind you. The breeze gets drier. The road gets meaner. Sand gets into everything. Into sandals, hems, food, eyelids, teeth. Ancient travel is basically agreeing to become crunchy for several days in a row. Every cartwheel groans. Every animal smells offended. You leave behind the coast where wealth rolls in with the tide and head toward the hill country of Israel, where the dust sits on your skin like a personal insult. The architecture changes. The accents change. The looks change fastest of all, because now you are not home. Now every doorway holds a face evaluating your clothes, your servants, your language, your perfume, your baggage, and possibly your gods. You arrive with polished wood, worked ivory, dyed textiles, foreign habits, and the unmistakable energy of someone raised where things smelled better and cost more. That alone is enough to make a room go stiff. And then there is court life in Samaria, which is no picnic either. New palace, same old misery. Stone halls that trap heat by day and leak cold by night. Floors that are somehow both dusty and slippery. Curtains carrying the smell of oil lamps, old smoke, and expensive incense trying heroically to beat back the odor of too many humans in enclosed space. Royal meals look impressive until you remember everyone at the table has a motive. Bowls of figs, olives, honey, roasted meat, warm bread, wine cut with water. Lovely. Also, every conversation is a potential ambush wearing jewelry. This is where it starts to tighten around you. Not with a cartoon villain twirling in candlelight, but with a foreign princess in a hard world, crossing from sea breeze to dry hills, from home ground to suspicious ground. She walks into a kingdom already tense, already religious, already political, already one bad season away from panic. And you are right there with her. You feel the purple dye still faintly on your fingertips. You smell incense trapped in your hair. Dust settles on your sandals before noon. Somewhere down the corridor, a servant hurries past with a message no one will enjoy. Somewhere beyond the palace walls, prophets are already muttering. Nobles are already calculating, and the future is sharpening its knives. So tonight, you do not meet a legend first. You meet the hallway, the harbour, the marriage bed with too many blankets, the jars of oil, the sea wind, the dry road, the stare of a new court waiting to decide what kind of woman just walked through the gate. Before anyone ever hissed her name like a curse, you are still in the coast-born world that raised her, breathing cedar smoke and expensive trouble. The sun is higher now, and Sidon is fully awake, which means the noise has stopped pretending to be civilized. Hammering from the shipyards, donkeys complaining like union representatives, men shouting prices across the docks, gulls diving at fish guts with the kind of confidence usually found only in royalty and thieves. You step out into a palace courtyard and the smell changes again. Sea salt, warm stone, crushed herbs under somebody's sandal, fresh bread from the kitchens, lamp oil, perfume, tar, hot metal, dead fish. It all rolls together in one magnificent assault, like a luxury banquet hosted inside a functioning warehouse. This is home before Israel is ever a problem. Sidon, where wealth arrives wet. Everything here moves because the sea says so. Ships lean against the harbor like tired beasts, their hulls sticky with pitch, their ropes rough and damp. Men unload cedar beams, copper ingots, jars of oil, sacks of grain, cages of birds, baskets of shellfish, and mysterious wrapped bundles that nobody opens casually. Trade in this city is constant. Even at dawn, somebody is bargaining, cursing, loading, counting, or discovering that a rat has already sampled the merchandise. And above all that racket rises the palace, where a king's daughter grows up learning that splendor is mostly scheduling plus surveillance. You don't just drift through a place like this and accidentally become royal. You are arranged into it. From childhood, somebody is always brushing your hair, correcting your posture, telling you not to fidget, and moving your hands away from your face like your own fingers are a diplomatic incident. Shoulders, a servant snaps. You straighten. Another adjusts a bracelet. Another smooths linen over your chest. Another brings a tray of tiny containers and opens them one by one with grim ceremony. Cream for the skin, scented oil for the hair, powder for the face, kohl for the eyes. Ancient cosmetics are less self-care routine and more small-scale chemistry project with status implications. The kohl goes on cool and greasy. You hold still while a servant drags the dark line around your eyes with the concentration of a surgeon defusing a bomb. One flinch, and now you look like you lost a fight with a charcoal basket. Nobody laughs. Palace people do not laugh when appearances are at stake. That is another thing Sidon teaches early. Luxury pinches, tightens, corrects, and smiles while it does it. Your father is Ethbal, and his house does not run on affection. It runs on control. Priests, officials, merchants, captains, scribes, guards. Everybody is linked together like hooks in a fishing net. Tug one, the whole thing tightens. In this world, religion and politics share a pillow and steal each other's blankets. Temple offerings smell like devotion, yes, but also like tax revenue and public image. You learn this before you are old enough to call it anything. You walk past incense burners taller than a child. You pass storerooms packed with oil jars sealed in wax. You see priests with washed hands and expensive robes, and behind them servants carrying ledgers, keys, and worried expressions. Sacred space is sacred, absolutely, but it also has inventory. You notice these things because palace life trains your eyes before it trains your conscience. Not openly, of course. Openly, you are serene, graceful, composed, a decorative vessel with excellent posture. Inside, your mind is counting who enters first, who bows deepest, who gets kept waiting, and who leaves through the side passage looking pale. Palace childhood is basically being raised inside a very expensive weather system. One day, the air is calm. The next, a messenger arrives breathless from a ship, and suddenly half the household is moving faster, talking lower and pretending not to panic. You learn to read mood from footsteps. Fast sandals on stone mean trouble. Soft sandals mean secrets. No sandals at all means somebody important is trying to sneak, which never works because ancient palaces echo like ceramic bowls. Breakfast appears on low tables with polished metal cups and warm flatbread wrapped in cloth. There are olives slick with oil, figs split open and sticky with sweetness, fresh cheese, dates, honey, herbs, and sometimes fish grilled with enough seasoning to convince you it did not spend yesterday staring at people. Rich food, beautiful food, food arranged by hands that have been awake for hours. You eat while servants hover. That is palace life in one sentence. Honestly, you eat while servants hover. Privacy remains a myth. Personal space is a fantasy. Even your snack has witnesses. From the upper rooms, you can look toward the harbor and see the source of Sidon's attitude. Purple dye vats bubble in workshops near the shore, and the air around them is rank enough to insult a corpse. The famous color comes from crushed murex snails, and the process smells like the sea itself has died in a heated argument. Men and women stir the vats with stained arms and ruined clothing. Their fingers stay dark. Their nails stay dark. Their whole lives look faintly bruised by prestige. And the cloth that comes out of that filth is glorious. Deep red purple, rich enough to make ordinary fabric look embarrassed. Draped over a chair in the palace, it tells the room exactly who matters. Which is very funny because its journey began in a pile of smashed sea snails and industrial stink. You look at the cloth and have to laugh a little. All this prestige started as smashed sea snails and a smell that could end a friendship. You grow up with that lesson in your nose and under your fingernails too. What glitters in the reception hall began somewhere sweaty. Cedar beams from Lebanon arrive fragrant and smooth, then vanish into palace roofs and temple work. Ivory carvings gleam in shadowed rooms. Bronze bowls catch the lamplight. Gold jewelry lies on trays lined with linen, as if it simply appeared there by magic rather than being dug, smelted, hammered, traded, stolen, counted, melted again, and carried across half the world by men with back problems. Sidon is cosmopolitan, which is a lovely word, meaning everybody brings their gods, accents, body odor, and business disputes to the same waterfront. Walk the market, and you hear languages folding over each other. Bargains struck with hand gestures, oaths, laughter, insults, scribes muttering as they tally, sailors with braided beards, traders in soft linen, soldiers smelling of leather and old sweat. Perfume sellers crouched behind tiny jars of oils, so precious they are handled like newborn kings. You stop at one stall where a merchant tips a drop of perfume onto your wrist. It blooms warm against the skin. Myrrh, cinnamon, resin, something floral underneath. Expensive enough to make a priest nervous. You lift your hand to smell it and catch beneath the sweetness the harbor again. Tar, salt, fish rot, human labor. Sidon refuses to let anyone be pure fantasy for long. Back inside the palace, education continues. Not with cute little lessons and encouraging applause. More with stern adults, wax tablets, and the constant possibility of embarrassment. You learn names of ports, names of rulers, names of gods. You learn offerings, formal greetings, genealogies, trade goods, treaty language, household management, ritual order, and the art of hearing what was not said out loud. A royal daughter is not trained for leisure. She is trained for placement. You practice sitting through long ceremonies without moving your face. You practice receiving gifts as though you have never seen such things before, even when you saw 3 better ones last week. You practice speaking carefully enough that no one can later pretend you promised more than you did. It is the ancient equivalent of corporate media training, except the jewelry is heavier, and one mistake could trigger military consequences. Servants teach you different things than tutors do. Tutors explain names and rules. Servants explain survival. They tell you which official drinks too much, which courtwoman repeats everything she hears, which guard can be trusted with a message, and which one sweats under pressure. They show you how to pin a veil so it stays put in coastal wind, how to tuck a charm into your clothing without making it obvious, how to walk on polished floors in sandals that are somehow both beautiful and determined to kill you. One woman grinds malachite and galena for eye paint while talking in a low voice about marriages. Not love. Never love first. Marriages are routes, access, ports, grain, armies, favor, insurance. A woman of your rank is not asked where she wishes to live. She is wrapped, perfumed, jeweled, and sent where men believe peace or power might be purchased. The necklace on your throat is part ornament, part invoice. You understand this, young. Maybe not all at once, but in layers. First, you notice how visiting envoys look at you. Then you notice who notices them looking. Then you understand why older women in the palace go suddenly quiet when certain names are spoken. One city needs timber, another wants access to trade, another kingdom sits inland with land routes and political headaches. Somebody somewhere is always looking at a daughter and seeing a bridge. It is an ugly thought inside a beautiful room. So you become very good at being looked at without giving anything away. Festivals make the whole arrangement more obvious. The city brightens itself. Banners move in the breeze. Musicians fill courtyards with drums, pipes, and strings sharp enough to pierce bone. Offerings go up in smoke. Meat roasts over fires. Wine flows. Garlands appear. Bodies pressed together in temple courts and palace spaces alike. Public devotion and public power stand shoulder to shoulder, both perfumed, both hungry. You watch from a place of honor and feel the weight of spectacle. People below cheer the king. Priests lift their hands. Servants carry trays. Dancers turn. Incense lifts in pale ribbons. Somewhere out in the city, a laborer is elbow deep in fish scales, but up here, everything is polished. That is the trick. Royal life is an endless campaign to keep the labor out of sight and the authority in view. Still, bits of reality break through. A torch sputters because the oil was poor. A nobleman's wig sits slightly crooked. A child throws up from too much sweet wine and gets whisked away. The roast lamb arrives fragrant and perfect until someone starts carving near the joint and the smell gets very immediate. Blood, fat, smoke, spices. Ancient banquets are gorgeous right up until they become aggressively anatomical. You eat from silver or bronze, wiping fingers on linen while musicians play. There is duck sometimes, goose, lentils rich with herbs, pomegranate syrup, cakes sweetened with honey, nuts, soft cheese, dates split and stuffed, fresh cucumbers in season, figs until you think you may actually become a fig. Then the trays are taken away and the business begins. Men talk over cups. Women listen and speak in ways that count just as much. Everybody knows where influence is supposed to sit. Everybody also knows influence wanders. Through marriages, through servants, through favors, through gods, through whatever was whispered on a terrace while the sea wind covered the sound. And because you are Ethbal's daughter, your education includes the unpleasant truth that piety and strategy are roommates. Temple processions are not separate from statecraft. Dedications are not separate from diplomacy. A god's favor is discussed alongside shipping routes and border concerns, as naturally as discussing weather with laundry. Nobody in this world finds that strange. You would find it strange if they separated them. Why would they? The same men who manage altars may also carry messages. The same royal gift can honor a deity, flatter a priesthood, and signal an alliance in one tidy package. Efficient, really. Disturbing, but efficient. So the years pass in cedar-paneled rooms, sun-bright courtyards, and corridors cool enough to make bare arms pebble. You grow older, taller, more self-possessed, hair braided and unbraided 1,000 times, hands hennaed for festivals, wrists stacked with metal, ears heavy with pendants, skin rubbed with fragrant oils after baths poured by women who have no illusions about anybody's importance. Bathing, by the way, is less serene than paintings would have you believe. Steam, splashing, scraping, bowls sloshing, servants wringing cloths, somebody dropping a comb, somebody else apologizing, and all of it taking much longer than you wanted. You emerge gleaming and perfumed, yes, but also mildly annoyed and aware that 4 women now know the exact shape of your left shoulder. Royal dignity is extremely collaborative. There are lessons in childbirth too, though nobody advertises them as such. You see women disappear into labor rooms and return altered, exhausted, triumphant, grieving, or not at all. You hear adults talk about heirs with the same practical tone used for grain reserves. Dynasties are built through women's bodies, and everyone acts as though this is merely one more household matter, like oil storage. That knowledge settles cold. One older attendant fastens a necklace around your throat and says, almost casually, that a queen is expected to be fruitful, gracious, politically useful, ritually respectable, and never visibly tired. A fascinating list, especially since each item alone could ruin a person. You smile, because what else are you going to do? Scream into the jewelry box. By now, you know how this works. The finer the linen, the tighter the leash. A princess in Sidon moves through rooms full of luxury, but every luxury is also a signal. Your robe says rank, your perfume says access, your seating says favor, your silence says one thing to one person and another thing to someone else. Even the servants assigned to you can be read like a public announcement. Too many, and you seem indulgent. Too few, and you seem diminished. It is exhausting. Elegantly exhausting. One afternoon, you stand on a terrace while ships come in under a gold wash of late light. The sea is calm enough to look innocent. Below, men unload amphorae and timber while scribes keep score. The whole city glows. Purple cloths from the dye works hang drying. Cedar stacks release their sweet, dry smell in the heat. Brass catches the sun. Somewhere nearby, someone opens a jar of perfumed oil, and the breeze carries it upward. This should feel peaceful. Instead, it feels like waiting. Because talk is beginning to gather around you like storm damp, visiting envoys, inland powers, the kingdom of Israel, Ahab, Omri's line, roads east and south, trade interests, security. The sort of conversations that always begin in polished rooms and end with a woman packed onto a caravan. No one presents it dramatically at first. Ancient royals love pretending the enormous thing is merely an administrative detail. One day, an official lingers after a meal. Another day, your attendants discuss travel chests. A jeweler is called. Fine textiles are inventoried. Gifts are selected with terrifying care. Ivory combs, worked metal, dyed garments, vessels of oil, decorative pieces. Marriage shows up looking suspiciously like a packing project with better jewelry. And now, you reach the part nobody likes saying out loud. The bride is expected to go smiling. It does not matter that home smells like salt wind and cedar, and every corridor holds your own history. It does not matter that inland courts have different tempers, different gods, different food, different ways of looking at a woman from the coast. It does not matter that you have heard enough to know you will be watched from the moment you arrive. Royal daughters do not get to say, "Actually, no thank you, I prefer the harbour." You are bathed, oiled, dressed, adorned. You are turned into agreement. The preparations go on for days. Chests thump shut. Linen is folded. Jewelry wrapped in cloth. Cosmetic pots sealed. Servants chosen. Animals assigned. Guards counted. The palace shifts around the coming departure like a body adjusting to pain. Everybody becomes efficient. Nobody becomes sentimental where it can be seen. Your father receives people. Priests perform rites. Blessings are spoken over a future that smells strongly of diplomacy and uncertain weather. Somewhere in those ceremonies, you stop feeling like a daughter and start feeling like cargo wrapped in gold. The route ahead is discussed over maps and memory. Water sources, staging points, safe roads, dangerous roads, seasonal heat, places where wheels sink, places where bandits watch from rock and scrub. Ancient travel planning is basically a long conversation about thirst, axle failure, and what to do when a mule decides. Today is the day it no longer believes in civilization. You listen. Of course you listen. You know better than to imagine marriage as a private matter. It is movement, cargo, ceremony, performance, a transfer of significance from one palace to another. When you leave Sidon, you do not go alone. You take language, custom, expectation, attendance, clothing styles, food habits, ritual habits, and every prejudice anybody has about coastal people wrapped neatly in embroidered cloth. On the last evenings before departure, the city feels sharper, the harbour louder, the gulls more obnoxious. The fish smell somehow gets stronger on your last nights there. Salt, rot, scales, harbour slime. You breathe through your mouth and still regret it. You walk through familiar rooms and register the little things that will soon become memory. A crack in a lintel, the cool touch of stone under your fingers, the scent of cedar chests opened at dawn, the dye stains on workers' hands below, the way lamps make polished metal look warm after sunset. Servants keep busy because busyness is easier than feeling. One braids your hair tighter than necessary. Another rearranges your veils 3 times. Another complains about dust inland as though she has already been personally insulted by it. A kitchen woman presses sweet cakes on attendants for the journey. Guards inspect spear points. A scribe checks lists again. Everyone behaves like this is ordinary. It is not ordinary. It is just familiar. At dawn, the courtyard fills. Animals snort. Leather creaks. Harness rings clink. Men shift bundles from one back to another. The air is cool for a moment before the day begins heating itself into cruelty. You can smell pack animals, fresh dung, lamp smoke from dying flames, and the sharp, clean edge of the sea beyond the walls. You stand dressed for departure, layered in linen and status. Jewelry cool against your skin, perfume at your throat, eyes darkened, hair arranged. Every inch of you says royal. Inside, you are carrying the knowledge every princess eventually gets handed. Your life may look splendid, but it will always be negotiable. The gates open. Beyond them waits the road inland, long and dusty and full of new judgments. Behind you, Sidon glitters in the early light. Shipmasts rise over the harbour. Cedar smoke climbs. Purple cloth hangs. The city smells expensive, industrious, and faintly rotten, like a treasure chest stored beside a bait bucket. It is home. You get one last breath of it. Then the caravan lurches forward, sandals scrape, wheels groan, and the coast begins to fall behind. 3 days pass. Nothing improves. The sea smell fades first, which feels personal. Then the air dries out, the wind gets stingier, and dust starts attaching itself to your face like it has legal rights. It settles in your hair, your eyelashes, your teeth, and every fold of fabric you own. By noon each day, you taste road. By evening, you are road. The caravan stretches ahead and behind in a groaning line of animals, servants, guards, gift chests, rolled textiles, spare sandals, cooking pots, and enough diplomatic clutter to stock a small palace. Your baggage includes linen, perfumes, jewelry, and ceremonial vessels. It also includes the expectations of Sidon, the ambitions of your father, the convenience of Ahab, and several gods no one in Israel is going to discuss in a normal voice. That last part travels especially badly. At the stopping places, people try to be formal. Fires are lit, bread is warmed, water is poured with tedious little courtesies. Yet every camp has that particular silence that means everyone knows this marriage matters too much to relax around it. Guards sleep lightly. Servants whisper. Somebody always snores. Somewhere in the dark, a mule expresses its feelings at great volume, and its feelings are apparently anti-monarchy. You sleep on cushions spread over carpets, which sounds luxurious until you remember you are still on the ground. The nights are cold enough to bite. The mornings smell of damp wool, ashes, animal breath, and yesterday's stew pretending it deserves another chance. Someone reheats lentils. Someone else burns flatbread. A servant combs dust from your hair and gives up halfway through because there is simply too much of it. This is travel in the ancient world, expensive discomfort with a security detail. As you move farther inland, the landscape changes its attitude. The coast had noise and moisture and commerce. This has scrub, rock, hard fields, and villages that look at your procession the way a household looks at smoke coming from the roof. People stop what they are doing to stare. Children point. Men straighten up from hoes and stand with one hand shading their eyes. Women pause with water jars against their hips, tracking every animal and every chest, calculating what sort of trouble comes packaged this neatly. You know what they see. Foreign fabrics, foreign attendants, painted eyes, coastal ornaments, the polished look of a woman raised where ships bring in expensive nonsense by the boatload. To them, every step you take smells like ship pitch, perfume, and expensive foreign trouble. And now the wedding songs are behind you, and you discover that marrying a king does not mean anyone intends to welcome you. The first greeting is ceremonial enough. Messengers ride out. Words are exchanged. Gifts are inspected with the solemn suspicion of men who assume every fine object hides an agenda, which, in fairness, many of them do. Formal language smooths over the obvious fact that everybody is measuring everybody else, like merchants checking for damaged cargo. Ahab's people are not barefoot bumpkins. They know courts, they know treaties, they know what a marriage alliance is supposed to look like. But knowing the rules and liking the bride are two very different tasks. You see it in the glances. A little too long on the Sidonian dress. A little too sharp on the attendants. A little pause when one of your priests speaks. A little tightening around the mouth at mention of Baal. Nothing dramatic. Ancient courts specialize in controlled disapproval. Nobody throws a jug. They just make sure you feel the jug was considered. By the time the hills of Samaria rise ahead, you are tired in the bones. The city sits on its height with walls catching the light, self-important in the way only fortified capitals can be. Stone terraces, towers, gates, rooflines packed close together. You approach under a sky bleached pale by heat, and the road below the city is churned into a lovely paste of dust, hoofprints, and droppings. A royal arrival always sounds glamorous until you remember it happens over manure. Trumpets announce the procession. They are not subtle. Nothing in ancient ceremony is subtle. Sound bounces off stone. Gate guards pull themselves straighter. Officials assemble their faces. Servants hurry. Somewhere just inside, someone is still dragging a bench into position while pretending this was the plan all along. You pass through the gate, and the smell changes all at once. Less salt, more people, warm plaster, donkey, baking bread, old urine in sun-baked corners, lamp smoke, trampled straw, and the faint sweetness of crushed figs from a market basket under somebody's sandal. Cities inland smell used. Samaria has ambition, yes, but it also has drains doing their best and failing. Heads turn as you pass. Of course they do. A foreign princess has arrived to marry their king. You are a parade, a rumor, and a problem in jewelry. Women peer from doorways. Men squint under headcloths. Children try to run closer until somebody yanks them back. Even the dogs seem interested, which is rude but honest. The palace stands above the city, and up close it looks exactly like royal architecture everywhere. Impressive, strategic, and full of hidden corners where someone is definitely listening. You dismount. Your legs nearly forget how to belong to you. A servant steadies your elbow. Another adjusts your veil. Another wipes road dust from your sandals as though the entire kingdom might collapse if your left foot looks disrespected. You stand there while ceremony unfolds around you, every muscle aching, every eye on your face, and smile the smile royal women have been using for centuries. Calm, pleasant. Not one visible trace of the urge to lie down on the nearest floor and refuse history. Then you meet Ahab. He is king already, and he wears it like a man accustomed to rooms changing when he enters them. Not old, not young, groomed, jeweled, watched. A man born into enough pressure that he has learned to stand still while other people rearrange reality around him. He is not a stranger to alliance. He is alliance with a beard. You study him while everyone speaks the approved words. He studies you too. There is no dramatic lightning bolt, no convenient music, just two royal people in layered clothing, sweating slightly under formal linen, understanding perfectly well that this marriage is a bridge built from human beings. You will have to live on it. The wedding itself is a blur of ritual, food, smoke, and public approval performed at exhausting volume. Hands are washed, blessings are spoken, offerings burn, Priests move with the grave confidence of men who know the whole room has to watch them. Jewelry catches torchlight. Wine is poured. Bread is broken. Somebody chants. Somebody else nearly misses their cue. The whole thing proceeds with the shaky dignity of an event, arranged by very powerful people and carried out by tired servants. Then, the feasting begins because ancient people would not dream of handling statecraft without carbs. Low tables appear. Roast meat arrives glistening. Wine cups circle. There are olives, lentils, herbs, fresh bread, honeyed cakes, figs and sauces rich enough to make your fingers shine. The air thickens with meat fat, incense, sweat, perfume, and too many bodies in one room trying to act stately while chewing. A musician plucks a stringed instrument somewhere near a pillar. A drunk nobleman laughs too loudly. A servant slips, recovers, and continues as if his soul did not just leave his body. You sit beside Ahab and become part of the furniture in the most important way possible. That is what the first days feel like. Sit straight, smile gently, let every room inspect you like a traded object. You are visible, arranged, read by everyone. How you sit matters. How often you speak matters. Whether the king looks at you matters. Whether the queen from Sidon seems comfortable, arrogant, pious, foreign, fertile, dangerous, charming, or all six before dessert matters very much. And you can feel the comparison already. How much Sidon comes with you? How much Israel changes around you? How much of your own household will remain? Which servants stay close? Which priests find a place? Which customs get tolerated because they came with the marriage bed and the trade agreement? This is the awkward unpacking phase of international politics, except with cosmetics. Your chambers are prepared, of course. Prepared is generous. Furnished, yes. Swept, mostly. Stocked with linens and carved chests and polished vessels. There are rugs underfoot, a bed platform with cushions, painted details on the walls, and braziers for warmth when the nights turn cold. Yet it all smells wrong. New stone. Fresh plaster. Foreign oil. Different herbs in the rushes. A strange palace can be beautifully appointed and still feel like sleeping inside someone else's opinion. Servants bring in your own things. Now the real migration begins. Chests opened, garments shaken out, jewelry sorted, cosmetic jars lined up, Sidonian fabrics draped over local furniture like an elegant invasion. Perfume from the coast uncorked to smother the smell of inland storage rooms. Your people move through the chambers, restoring familiar order, one folded cloth at a time. It is amazing how quickly a room can start saying, "No, actually, we live here now." Not everyone loves this. You hear it in the mutters outside doors, in the way local attendants look at imported ones, in the tiny household wars over placement and precedence. Who serves first? Who carries messages? Which kitchen prepares which dishes? Who has access to the queen's rooms? A palace is a nest of status disputes with better decoration. Then there is language. You know the tongues of courts well enough to function. But function is not the same as belonging. Every room has its own rhythm. Every court has preferred phrases, favored jokes, dangerous words, and the sort of polite expression that means absolutely not. In Samaria, you hear accents flatten in your presence, then spring back the moment people forget themselves. You catch the little pauses after you speak, not because they do not understand you, because they do, and they are deciding what it means that it came from your mouth. You become very aware of your own voice. One wrong word, and suddenly a whole reception hall has a story about the foreign queen who doesn't speak properly. One misjudged custom, and someone whispers for a month about Sidonian arrogance. You learn fast. You always did. But learning under observation is a special kind of headache. Palace mornings begin before you are ready for them. Light slips across the floor. Servants arrive with water basins, cloths, fresh linen, combs, oils, and news. Always news. Someone wants an audience. Someone brought gifts. Someone complained about grain. Someone from the countryside is waiting. Someone from the temple is offended. Someone from the military needs the king. Someone from your own household is quarreling with someone from his overstorage jars. Civilization is basically 1,000 small inconveniences wrapped in hierarchy. You are dressed piece by piece. Undergarment, outer garment, belt, jewelry, veil, perfume, coal, hairpinned, bracelets adjusted, sandals strapped. A queen does not simply get up and shuffle around with her hair doing whatever it wants. There is no ancient version of just throwing something on. Everything is intentional, and all of it takes forever. Then you step into the day. Samaria's palace is not Sidon. That keeps being true in new and irritating ways. There is less sea breeze, more enclosed heat, less dock noise, more courtyard echo, less sense that wealth arrives by ship every hour, more sense that power sits here and expects the land around it to comply. The kitchens smell different. The bread tastes different. The wine has a different edge. Even the dust is somehow more judgmental. Still, Ahab's court is no crude outpost. Officials move with confidence. Scribes scratch on tablets. Messengers come and go. Armor gleams in shaded corridors. Storerooms hold grain, oil, and wine in sufficient quantities to remind you that kingdoms run on inventory long before they run on ideals. Carved furnishings, imported luxuries, worked metal, fine textiles, and decorated ivory all appear in the right rooms. Samaria wants everyone to know it belongs among serious powers. That suits a woman from Sidon perfectly. You begin to shape your place. A queen does not need to shout to alter a court. She needs rooms, routines, attendants, gifts, and patience. New fabrics appear at banquets. New perfumes cling to corridors. New dishes enter the kitchen. New craftsmen find employment. New priests receive support. New forms of devotion become visible. A court absorbs what is brought to it, especially when what is brought arrives wearing a crown. This is where the room starts feeling smaller, because in a palace, an incense burner is never just an incense burner. It comes with priests, favors, and a fresh argument before supper. They come with altars, personnel, offerings, patronage, and whose side are you on energy? Your household did not leave its sacred habits in Sidon any more than it left behind its combs and bronze mirrors. A queen from the coast does not suddenly wake up inland and say, "Delightful, I have abandoned my world." No, she brings it with her. Incense, rites, names, symbols, priests who know how things should be done and are not shy about looking unimpressed when local people do them differently. You can feel the kingdom stiffen around that. Some at court are practical. An alliance is an alliance. Trade is useful. Peace has advantages. Fine cedar does not haul itself over mountains. But practicality has limits, especially once devotion enters the room wearing foreign perfume. One incense burner becomes a murmur. A protected priesthood becomes resentment. An altar becomes an insult somebody discusses over supper with alarming intensity. And now your marriage has become everyone's business in the full ancient sense. Not just who you sleep beside, who you feed, who you favor, which god receives smoke, which officials rise, which visitors gain access, which customs are tolerated because the queen prefers them. Soon enough, what is burned in your rooms, who eats at your table, and which names your servants whisper starts changing the whole air of the kingdom. So you learn another royal skill, smiling while resistance collects. At public meals, the bowls are full and the faces are controlled. Servants move between couches with wine and roasted meat. Music softens the corners. Conversation drifts through taxes, harvests, military concerns, marriages, building work. And underneath all of it, like a bone in fish stew, there is that gritty little awareness. The queen is foreign. The king has welcomed her, and not everybody plans to clap. You notice who avoids your eye. You notice who overcompensates by flattering too hard. You notice who is perfectly courteous, yet somehow manages to say, "our fathers" and "our traditions," as though handing you a polite knife. None of this is accidental. Courts are arenas where people stab using etiquette. Ahab, for his part, does not spend all day explaining anyone's feelings to you, which is probably wise because there are too many of them. He rules. He receives. He negotiates. He hunts. He presides. He eats. He listens to men argue. He makes decisions that ripple outward through villages you may never see. He also returns to rooms where you are now present, and that presence matters. Maybe he values the alliance. Maybe he values what your background brings. Maybe he values you personally in ways history is far too rude to preserve in detail. Whatever the mixture, you are not decorative filler. A king does not marry a Sidonian princess for embroidery tips. So the marriage settles into its daily performance. You learn his habits. He learns yours. You share meals, ceremonies, long corridors, private rooms, and the endless interruption machine of royal life. A servant enters. A message arrives. Another petition, another messenger, another sacrifice, another guest. Ancient monarchy is basically trying to have one conversation while 12 people hover nearby with trays and military updates. Then there is the business no one says plainly in public, but everyone inventories in private. Heirs. You can feel it from the first weeks. The subtle watchfulness of older women. The offerings. The blessings that linger a little too long on fruitfulness. The household calculations around your body as if your womb were state infrastructure. You eat, bathe, pray, dress, and sleep, while the future dynasty hangs over every chamber like humidity. Charming. A queen must produce legitimacy in the most physical way possible, not by giving speeches, not by issuing policy papers, by surviving pregnancies, delivering sons if possible, daughters too if the house is sensible, and doing all of this while remaining graceful enough for public life. One day, you are presiding over a banquet in layered linen. Another day, women are discussing your cycle in low voices near a doorway. Royal privacy is a joke with expensive upholstery. When pregnancy comes, the palace shifts. Food changes. Rest is supervised. Offerings multiply. Advice appears from every direction, much of it contradictory, and all of it delivered with confidence. Eat this. Avoid that. Sleep on this side. Wear this charm. Pray here. Do not step there. Women who have birthed children now look at you with the grave, practical solidarity of veterans who have seen things. Men become ceremonially hopeful and otherwise stay out of the way, because even kings understand some thresholds are best approached cautiously. Your body stops being merely yours and becomes a national waiting room. And yet, life in Samaria does not pause because a queen is uncomfortable. The court still runs. Officials still come. Priests still argue. Fields still need rain. Armies still need feeding. Storehouses still need accounting. The kitchens still smell of onion, meat broth, garlic, spilled beer, and singed grain. Servants still sweep up broken pottery and curse under their breath. The city below still bakes in summer heat, still floods with noise in the market, still carries dung in the streets and gossip in the alleys. You begin to know it. Not as home exactly. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way Sidon was home, but as the place where your influence now lives, the cadence of its mornings, the feel of its stone stairs, the way afternoon heat clings to walls, the quality of lamplight in its upper rooms, the names of the women who can be trusted to keep silent, the names of the men who cannot, the routes messages take, the corners where servants pause to listen, the courtyards where formal smiles go to sharpen themselves. This is queenship too, not just splendid robes and public appearances. Memory, management, endurance, knowing which room smells of cedar chests, which one of damp plaster, which one of men who have been arguing since dawn, knowing when to send a gift, when to send a servant, when to send a warning wrapped in courtesy, knowing that everyone expects you to be soft enough to flatter, strong enough to matter, fertile enough to secure the house, and foreign enough to remain useful, but not so foreign that people revolt over dinner. An exhausting brief. And still, there are moments of strange ordinary life. A child laughs in the women's quarters. One of your attendants from Sidon teaches a local girl a different braid pattern. Someone spills oil and nearly breaks a wrist trying not to slip. A tray of cakes arrives still warm, and for one blessed minute, the room smells only of honey and baked grain. Evening wind moves through a lattice. The city hum softens below. You look out from a high place and see rooftops fading into dusk, smoke rising from household fires, and beyond it, all the land that this marriage was meant to steady. It almost feels manageable. Then another murmur reaches you, another offended face, another pious complaint, another sign that what was tolerated yesterday is resented today. Because friction does not stay still. It warms, it spreads, it finds dry places. And Samaria, for all its polished chambers and royal ceremony, is full of dry places. So the years begin their work. The foreign queen becomes familiar and never fully accepted. The alliance takes root in the palace while unease takes root outside it. Children are born, customs settle, resentments thicken. The walls hold all of it, incense and argument, feast smoke and prayer, marriage and maneuver. You stand in the middle of that storm in jewels and coal, expected to smile like this was always a simple arrangement. It was never simple. It was a king, a coast-born queen, a hilltop capital, and a kingdom trying to decide how much strangeness it could endure before calling it sin. And now the sky begins to harden, the fields begin to thirst, and the gods are about to stop being a matter of palace preference and become a public emergency. But the perfume burns off quickly when the rain stops, and soon the whole kingdom tastes like dust. At first, it feels temporary, an annoying delay, a stretch of dry weather, the sort of thing people discuss with narrowed eyes over bread, and then wave away with practiced confidence. Next week, surely. Next month, at worst. The jars are still decent. The cisterns still hold enough. Nobody in a palace likes panic before breakfast. Then the ground starts changing its mind about life. Grass gives up first. It yellows, then greys, then vanishes into a brittle fuzz that crackles under sandals. The fields outside the city lose their softness. They harden and split. Fine lines open in the soil like wrinkles in an old clay bowl, then widen until a farmer can stand over them and swear with feeling. Trees stop pretending. Their leaves curl. Branches go thin. The whole countryside starts looking like it has been left too long near a fire. You wake in the morning with your tongue stuck to the roof of your mouth. Water is still brought to your chambers because queens do not shuffle down public steps carrying jars. But even in the palace, you notice the difference. The pitchers arrive less full. The servants pour more carefully. Nobody sloshes. Nobody wastes a drop rinsing a floor that can simply stay dusty. When you wash your hands, the water feels like an apology. By midday, the air itself seems irritated. It blows hot over the hills and through the courtyards, carrying powdered earth, donkey smell, and the stale sourness of worried people. Dust settles into the folds of curtains, the seams of cushions, the corners of eyes. It coats fruit in the market. It sits on roof tiles. It creeps into cooking pots and turns every meal into a reminder that the ground is winning. The animals know before the officials do. You hear it in the city. Cattle bellowing too long. Goats with that cracked, offended cry they use when the universe has personally failed them. Pack animals growing mean around troughs. Horses tossing their heads at empty buckets. The smell changes too. Less fresh dung, more dry, hot, concentrated stable funk. It rises in the afternoon like a curse with hooves. And now every conversation has weather in it. Not charming weather talk either. Not lovely breeze today. More, how low is the cistern who sold 2 donkeys because there was no fodder, whose barley failed, whose child is coughing, which village well is mud. Men come to court with dust on their hems and desperation tucked under their belts. Women in the markets stop haggling halfway through, because what's the point when no one knows what grain will cost tomorrow? In the palace, the kitchens adapt the way kitchens always do. Grimly. Stews get thinner. Bread gets meaner. The cooks stretch flour with whatever they can justify without getting stabbed by a nobleman. Lentils appear with aggressive frequency. Fresh herbs become memories. Meat grows occasional and ceremonial. You tear into a loaf and feel grit between your teeth because the grain was poor and the grinding worse. Luxury does not vanish all at once. It just gets embarrassing. Perfumed oils still exist. Fine linen still hangs in carved chests. Ivory inlays still gleam. But now there are servants carrying smaller water jars through hotter corridors, and every polished table sits inside a kingdom cracking at the edges. Gold looks different when cattle are dying within walking distance. Even incense starts to smell like overcompensation. So the gods move from the background to the dinner table. People were already tense about altars and offerings. Now they are rabid. Every shrine matters. Every prayer matters. Every priest becomes, in the public imagination, either a hero, a fraud, or a walking drought with sandals. The whole kingdom turns religion into a daily emergency, which is a terrible way to live and an even worse way to govern. You feel the pressure in the palace first as volume. More messengers, more petitioners, more men arguing in rooms with bad ventilation, more reports from estates, storehouses, and outlying towns. More discussions that begin in controlled voices and end with someone saying the divine name like a blade. Ahab hears all of it. You hear enough. The palace is suddenly full of people who want heaven managed like irrigation. And in the middle of this, Elijah appears, not with fanfare, not with polished ceremony, not with the graceful entrance of a court favorite. He arrives like the desert made a man and sent him in to ruin everyone's afternoon. Hairy, hard, abrupt, wearing rough garments and the expression of somebody who has no interest in courtly nonsense and even less interest in your mood. You see him once from across a hall and understand immediately why people keep talking about him. Some men are elegant, some are charming. This man looks like thunder learned to walk upright. Dust on his feet, wildness in his face. No silk, no rings, no respect for indoor voices. He carries that unbearable kind of certainty that makes everybody else feel underdressed. He does not flatter the king. He does not flatter you. He does not seem aware that there are whole systems of proper address meant to stop conversations from turning into disasters. He speaks of drought as judgment. He speaks of your God with open contempt. He speaks of the God of Israel as though all weather reports come directly through him. Then he vanishes again into the scrub and ravines, leaving the court smelling of sweat, incense, and insult. You can feel the room after he goes. Nobody breathes normally. Courtiers stare at each other with that pinched look people get when a guest has just overturned the table and somehow they are expected to continue serving figs. Ahab's jaw tightens. Scribes suddenly become fascinated by their tablets. Servants move more quietly, which is never a good sign. Quiet servants mean the house has entered dangerous gossip, and the drought goes on. That is the problem. If the man had shouted and then rain came, you could laugh him off. If he had shouted and the drought broke, people would call him dramatic and go back to their wine. But the sky remains hard, blue by day, cold and pitiless at night. Clouds drift near the horizon, sometimes like liars. Nothing falls. Weeks become months. Months collect into years. Cisterns sink lower. You look down into one and see a dark ring of old watermarks above a shrinking pool. The stone sides slick near the bottom and dry everywhere else. Men lower buckets farther and farther until the rope groans. The scrape echoes up through the shaft. Sometimes the bucket comes back light enough to make a grown man close his eyes. Travel through the countryside becomes a guided tour of disappointment. You ride past fields that should be green and find stubble, dust, and farmers crouched in hard soil as if glaring at it might help. Wells have lines at them. Troughs attract arguments. Villages smell less of baking and more of old straw, smoke, and the nervous musk of underfed animals. Children have dry lips. Women guard water jars like treasure. A donkey carcass bloats by the roadside, and nobody has the energy to drag it far. In Samaria, blame begins breeding like flies. Some mutter against Ahab for failing to please heaven. Some mutter against you because they were already doing that and now feel vindicated. Some mutter against the priests of Baal. Some mutter against the prophets of the God of Israel. Most people mutter against everyone while trying not to collapse from heat. A famine of patience arrives before the full famine of food. So you support your own. Of course you do. What else were you meant to do? Stand in the palace and politely watch your world be insulted. Your prophets and priests are still there, still eating at the royal table, still carrying the dignity of your household and the traditions you brought across the hills. They are not decorative imports. They matter. You protect them because queens protect what came with them, especially when enemies start speaking as if your whole religion is a stain on the floor. That only sharpens things. Now there are whispers that the queen favors the wrong men, that she feeds the wrong altars, that heaven has opinions about her guest list. Your halls fill with tensions so obvious they may as well wear name tags. Men avoid each other at banquets. Priests keep to their circles. Servants learn which names to speak softly and which not to speak at all. Then comes the uglier turn. The prophets of the God of Israel start turning up hidden, scattered, smuggled, protected in caves by nervous loyalists. Food must be carried secretly. Water too. Bread wrapped. Jars tucked under cloaks. Messages passed in courtyards by people trying to look casual and failing. Nothing says healthy kingdom quite like holy men hiding in holes while the queen's household scans the hills. Obadiah, one of Ahab's own officials, moves through this with the expression of a man trying to carry 2 full jars over uneven stones. Careful, tense, permanently one bad step from disaster. He serves the court. He fears your wrath. He also keeps prophets alive in secret, which is not the sort of hobby one advertises at formal dinners. By now, nobody is merely religious. Everyone is armed with conviction and one missed meal away from lunacy. The smell of fear changes a palace. It mixes with lamp smoke and old wool. It clings to hallways at dawn. It rides in with messengers whose horses are too thin and whose eyes have that red-rimmed look of men who have seen too much sun and not enough mercy. And now you reach the ugly part, the kind done at a table, with ink, a seal, and everybody pretending this is normal. Not with lightning, not with screaming, not with a skull-shaped mountain and a dramatic soundtrack. Just a room, a sulking king, and a queen who can tell within 3 breaths that everyone here is about to lose because one grown man did not get his preferred vegetable layout. The day is warm, the palace walls still holding afternoon heat. Air drifts through carved openings carrying dust, old stone, lamp smoke, and the sour little scent of somebody in a bad mood. You know that smell. Court has many smells. Cedar chests, perfumed oil, wool cloaks, stale wine, nervous sweat. Sulking has one too. It smells like untouched food. Ahab is on his bed, or near enough to it, turned inward like a child who has decided the world is unfair and must therefore be punished through dramatic horizontal posture. It would almost be funny if he were not king. He has come back from speaking with Naboth of Jezreel, and what he wanted seemed so simple in his own mind. Naboth has a vineyard beside the palace. Beside it. Right there. So close you could stand on an upper terrace and look down at neat rows of vines, green in season, silver underneath when the wind catches them. A tidy patch of cultivated beauty, exactly where a king might like a kitchen garden, or a pleasure ground, or anything more convenient than another man's inheritance. Ahab offered terms. Better land elsewhere. Money, if preferred. Very reasonable by palace standards, which is to say still weighted in the king's favor, but dressed in polite language. Naboth said no. Not hesitant, no. Not maybe after harvest, no. Not let me discuss it with my family. No, no. Because this land belonged to his fathers, and in this world, land is not just dirt with plants on it. It is memory, duty, bones in the ground, names carried forward. It is your grandfather's sweat and your children's bread. It is the family archive, only less portable and much more likely to have thorns. So Ahab comes home denied by a man with grapevines, and now he is pouting into the bedding. You step into the room and the atmosphere practically slaps you. curtains barely move. A platter sits nearby with food he has not touched, bread drying at the edge, a dish of cooked vegetables sweating into itself, wine standing ignored. A servant hovers with the hopeless expression of someone who has already tried, "My lord," perhaps a little broth, and nearly died of embarrassment. This is not majestic suffering. This is luxury despair. Ahab has the posture of a man personally betrayed by landscaping. He won't eat, he won't sit up, he won't stop replaying the insult. You can feel it rolling off him in waves. Irritation, humiliation, that particular royal disbelief that anybody with rough hands and dirt under the nails dared say no and continue breathing. You ask what happened, and he tells you. He tells you about the vineyard beside the palace in Jezreel. He tells you he offered a better one. He tells you he offered payment. He tells you Naboth refused because of his ancestral land. The words come out wounded, as though he has been denied a kingdom rather than denied improved garden access. You stand there and listen, and you read the room the way only someone bred in palaces can, faster than the scribes, faster than the servants, faster than Ahab himself. This is about a vineyard, yes, but you can smell the real problem already. Hurt pride, royal appetite, a man who heard no and took it personally. This is about a king who has been publicly checked by a subject, a local man in his own town, refusing royal desire with the language of inherited duty. Ahab feels the refusal in his skin, not because he is starving for produce. Nobody in a palace is one vineyard away from malnutrition. He feels it because power likes smooth surfaces, and Naboth has just introduced friction. You stand there for one beat, and then the solution settles into the room like a blade being set on a table. Ahab is moody. The household is stalled around his mood. The request was simple. The refusal was infuriating. The solution from where you stand appears equally simple. A king in this house should not lie on his couch like a disappointed toddler because a vineyard owner quoted ancestral piety at him. You tell him to get up and eat. You tell him to let his heart be cheerful. You tell him you will give him the vineyard. The room changes immediately, not morally. That would be nice. Atmospherically, because everybody hears certainty and relaxes. The servants do that small invisible exhale of people who just want the tray removed before the lentils develop a personality. The king shifts from sulk to attention. The whole chamber begins to move again because one person has decided the blockage is over. That is how these moments start. Not with chaos, with efficiency. Soon you are seated with writing materials. The table is smooth under your hands. A lamp burns nearby, even if daylight remains, because scribal work likes certainty. Wax warms. A seal is ready. Ink waits dark and glossy, thick enough to stain a fingertip for the rest of the day. A stylus scratches. Papyrus or prepared writing surface lies before you. It is all so ordinary. That is the appalling part. The ink sits there glossy and harmless-looking while the room arranges a death. You compose letters in Ahab's name, not your own. His. Authority moves best when it borrows the proper face. The message must arrive already dressed in legitimacy, carrying the smell of palace command. You know exactly whom to address. The elders, the nobles, the men who sit in Naboth's city and understand how public honor works, how fear works, how quickly a crowd can be guided if enough official language is draped over the ugliness. Call a fast, the letters say. That part is almost elegant in its horror. A fast means public seriousness, sacred alarm, a city summoned to collective solemnity, as though some offense hangs over the people and must be dealt with before worse follows. It gives the whole thing a righteous frame. You are not just grabbing land. You are staging concern. You are decorating violence with ritual. Set Naboth at the head of the people. Of course, put him where everyone can see him. Honor him first so the fall lands harder. There is an ancient talent for humiliation on display here, and it is disgustingly polished. Raise a man up in public only so accusation can find him at maximum height. Then seat two worthless men opposite him, the kind of men every town has. Thin-mouthed, eager, permanently available for dishonorable side work if the price is right or the pressure convincing enough. Men with the eyes of alley dogs and the ethics of spilled beer. They know how to swear to what never happened. They know how to make their faces earnest. They know the local theatre. Let them accuse Naboth of cursing God and king. That charge is fatal, not inconvenient, fatal. Now the shape is complete. Sacred assembly, public accusation, blasphemy, treason, civic duty. No blades drawn in a corridor, no poison in a cup, no messy private struggle with bodyguards and witnesses. Just procedure. Just signatures and piety and local men carrying out a sentence they can tell themselves was necessary. You seal the letters. The wax goes soft under heat and then firm under the seal. Press. Lift. Done. It is such a small motion. A thumb could almost cover it. Yet that little stamped circle travels farther than any shouted threat. It tells every elder who receives it that this comes with the full weight of the throne. It tells them disobedience will be remembered. It tells them the palace is not asking. Messengers take the letters. You hear sandals in the corridor, the quick controlled footfalls of men carrying instructions they do not intend to read twice. Door curtains shift. A guard steps aside. Hooves later, perhaps. Dust on roads. The letters leave the palace and become weather in somebody else's town. And now the machinery starts turning where you cannot see it directly, which somehow makes it worse. In Jezreel, the elders receive the order. You can picture them. Seated in a gate area or council space, old wood, rough stone, heat pressing down, flies interested in everybody. Men with lined faces, beards smelling faintly of oil and lunch, robes that have collected the day. They break the seal. They read. Their mouths tighten. This is where people like to imagine heroic resistance. It is a nice thought, very decorative. What actually fills the air is dread. The palace has spoken. The king's name sits atop the order. The queen's will breathes through every line, even if her name is absent. The elders know Naboth. They know his family. They know the vineyard in question. They also know how courts work, how dynasties remember, how quickly one troublesome local notable can become one dead troublesome local notable, while everyone else suddenly discovers a deep commitment to cooperation. So, they obey. That is how it happens. A few scared elders, one sealed order, a whole town deciding it prefers survival to courage. A fast is proclaimed. The city gathers. You can almost smell the square before you see it. Packed earth, sun-warmed stone, wool cloaks, dust kicked up by sandals, old wine in men's beards, animal droppings trodden flat, smoke from cooking fires lingering at the edges. Children are hushed badly. Women stand back or watch from doorways. Men come in with that tense public face used for funerals, accusations, and awkward village politics. Everybody knows something is wrong. Nobody knows yet how wrong. Naboth is brought forward and seated in a place of prominence. That moment lands hard. He may be confused, wary. Perhaps he smooths his garment before sitting. Perhaps he wonders what offense threatens the town. Perhaps he thinks the honor means respect. Human beings are tragically hopeful right up until they should not be. Then the witnesses step in. 2 men, faces arranged, voices ready. The accusation comes out in public air where it cannot be called back. Naboth has cursed God and king. There it is. No thunder follows. No miraculous interruption. Just words. Ugly little tools. A sentence launched into a listening crowd. You know how fast a room changes when shame enters it. Heads turn. Breathing shifts. Someone mutters. Someone else recoils because blasphemy is contagious in the imagination. Fear starts doing half the work before facts even put on their sandals. Maybe Naboth protests. Of course he protests. What else is an innocent man supposed to do? He says he did no such thing. He swears by the God they all fear. He looks from face to face for somebody sensible, somebody who has known him for years, somebody who remembers harvests, boundary stones, his father's name. He tries to appeal to memory, to decency, to simple recognition, and the machine keeps moving. Because once ceremony begins, it develops appetite. The elders have the charge. The witnesses have spoken. The people have been assembled under religious seriousness. The offense named is one that cannot be treated lightly. To hesitate now would be to question the whole public performance and, by extension, the authority behind it. Very few men do that, while royal wax still glistens in their mind. So they take Naboth outside the city. That phrase is neat and tidy. The walk is not. You go beyond the walls because some deaths are meant to happen away from homes, away from domestic spaces, away from the main thoroughfare where children chase each other and women carry grain and old men spit philosophy. Outside the city is where communal violence gets room to breathe. The ground out there is hard, stones everywhere. Of course, stones. This land manufactures them in industrial quantities. Naboth is led or dragged. Dust rises around ankles. The sun sits overhead like a supervisor with no compassion. The crowd follows at varying distances, some eager, some sickened, some simply unable to absent themselves, because no one wants to be the one neighbor who skipped the official execution. Ancient civic life is invasive that way. There is no, sorry, can't make it. Then they stone him. It is ugly in the way all stonings are ugly. Awkward, physical, horribly participatory. Not clean. Not swift in the way soldiers boast about swift things. You throw until a human body stops arguing with the world. Arms strain. Rocks strike. Breath leaves. Blood mixes with dust. Someone is panting. Someone misses. Someone chooses a heavier stone as if upgrading equipment for a household repair. The sound is the worst part. Not loud exactly. Worse. Thuds. Shouts. Scrape of sandals. A cry cut short. The deadening impact of matter against flesh while the afternoon carries on as if none of this is worth interrupting. Somewhere nearby, a bird still complains. Somewhere, a dog sniffs at discarded food. The universe remains offensively unceremonious. And then Naboth is dead. In some tellings, his sons die too, because inheritance has to be thoroughly erased when greed gets ambitious. Nothing says perfectly lawful transfer, like eliminating anyone who might still lay claim later. By evening, the message goes back. Naboth has been stoned and is dead. That is all the palace needs. A crisp little update. One sentence standing on the far side of blood, lies and shattered family continuity. Bureaucracy loves compression. it can reduce a catastrophe to a courier's breath. You hear it in the palace not as a howl, but as news. Delivered, received, understood. Somewhere a servant adjusts a lamp. Somewhere in another courtyard someone is washing a bowl. Somewhere cooks are arguing over onions. Life in a palace keeps going because palaces are obscene that way. They can absorb one man's death without even delaying supper. You go to Ahab. The matter is settled, you tell him. Naboth is dead. Arise. Take possession of the vineyard he refused to give you for money. You can picture the speed with which his mood improves. Not because grief has been resolved. He had none. Because obstruction has been removed. So off he goes to Jezreel, to the vineyard beside the palace, the coveted patch of green that launched all this polished wickedness. Maybe he walks the boundary in satisfaction. Maybe he is already planning herbs, vegetables, shade, irrigation, a more pleasing royal arrangement. Maybe he just enjoys standing on land that had the audacity to resist him yesterday and lies obediently under his sandals today. And that is why this episode curdles the stomach. Because all this blood started over a patch of ground small enough to walk across before your sandals got hot. No armies clashing in valleys, no mass uprising, no drought stretching across years, no mountain showdown with fire, just property theft with religious garnish. A king wanting a better view, a queen solving the inconvenience, local officials deciding survival tastes better than integrity, two scoundrels happy to rent out their tongues, one man dead because everyone involved could find a respectable reason to keep the process moving. The vineyard itself is almost offensively lovely. You stand near it and see healthy rows where leaves whisper against each other in the breeze. Tendrils curling around supports. Soil worked by years of care. A press may be nearby, stained from harvest seasons. The smell in warmer months would be green and sweet and slightly fermented, with crushed leaves underfoot and bees nosing around split fruit. It is domestic abundance, family labor made visible, exactly the sort of thing people love because they built it with ordinary years. That is what gets stolen. Not just land, accumulated life. A vineyard is pruning cuts, patient seasons, calloused hands, weather anxieties, jars cleaned, fences mended, baskets carried, old roots surviving one more summer. Naboth's refusal was not stubbornness about scenery. It was refusal to sever himself from the dead and the living at royal convenience. But convenience is a hungry god, and palaces are very good at feeding it. You walk those halls afterward and nothing outwardly changes. That is another awful detail. The same polished furniture, the same servants carrying trays, the same incense trying heroically to cover sweat, old rushes, and whatever died in the drain last week. A musician plucks strings in some distant chamber. Scribes bend over records. The machinery of rule remains smooth, because the men crushed in its gears are usually not invited back to complain. Still, something sticks in the air. Not guilt exactly. More like consequence approaching from a long way off, the way you smell rain before you feel it. A pressure, a heaviness in corridors. Because acts like this do not stay tucked inside administrative success. They spread. Stories move faster than carts. By tomorrow, by next week, by the next market day, people will be murmuring about Naboth, about the fast, about the witnesses, about the elders who obeyed, about the vineyard that changed hands with suspicious speed. Everybody knows what happened, even when everyone pretends not to know. That is the genius and filth of public injustice. It hides in plain sight. Nothing is secret, but nothing is admitted. The official version and the human version stand side by side like two men at a feast who refuse to acknowledge each other. And then, because this house cannot go 5 minutes without prophetic trouble arriving on dusty feet, Elijah appears again. Of course he does. You can almost hear the collective internal groan of the palace staff. Not him. Not today. Not when the king has only just upgraded his gardening situation. Ahab is in the vineyard when Elijah meets him. There among the stolen rows, under the same sun that watched Naboth die, the prophet arrives with that old desert severity intact. No perfume, no tact, no interest in softening a syllable for royal digestion. The confrontation lands like a jar shattering on stone. Ahab sees him and knows at once this is not a social call. The words out of his mouth carry bitterness, recognition, accusation. Have you found me, my enemy? You can feel the old hostility between them, stretched now over fresh murder and damp with moral rot. Elijah answers with judgment, not mild rebuke, not a disappointed head tilt, judgment thick as storm clouds, because the king has sold himself to do evil, because murder followed by theft is not erased by legal theatre, because the blood in the dust has a voice whether the court minutes acknowledge it or not, because the same dogs that lick at city's filth will one day have royal flesh to gnaw, because this house, so busy arranging its own convenience, has stacked up ruin like firewood. And your name is in it. Of course, your name is in it. Not as a footnote, not as incidental household support, as spark, as driver, as woman who stirred a weak king toward hard wickedness. Elijah hurls the future into the air, and it lands ugly. Dogs, walls, death, dynasty cut down, the house swept away like scraps from a butcher's floor. Nothing ruins a stolen vineyard quite like prophecy. Ahab hears it standing where Naboth should have stood. That matters. Place matters. Soil remembers. The leaves still move in the breeze. Insects still fuss around the vines. The day itself may even be beautiful, which is frankly rude. Yet now beauty has been contaminated by sentence. This patch of desired earth has become a courtroom with roots. And back in the palace, the news will come in waves. The prophet met the king in Naboth's vineyard. The prophet pronounced doom. The prophet named the house. Servants here, guards here, scribes here. Women grinding grain here from somebody's cousin who heard from somebody at the gate. Before long, the story is everywhere, because people cannot resist a tale featuring royal greed, forged letters, false witnesses, judicial killing, and a prophet storming in to say heaven noticed. It is the ancient equivalent of the worst neighborhood scandal, except everyone in the neighborhood might also die if they repeat it too loudly. That is why this story sticks. Not because it is grand, because it is familiar in all the worst ways. A request, a refusal, hurt pride, administrative pressure, respectable men doing shameful things in order, official language laundering private greed, religion used like a prop, an innocent person made into a public problem so his removal feels civic, property transferred, file closed. It feels horribly familiar. A bruised ego, respectable language, dead man, transferred property. You can feel how easily the whole thing fit into existing habits. Letters to officials, ceremony, witnesses, punishment, notice sent back, asset acquired. Nobody needed to invent new cruelty. They just used the tools already hanging on the wall. That is what makes it chillier than open warfare. War at least arrives yelling. This arrives with a chair pulled up, a seal warmed over flame, and somebody asking for more ink. A woman dictates. A seal presses. Elders comply. A crowd gathers. Stones rise and fall. A king goes out to inspect his new garden plans. By supper, the lamps are lit and the palace smells of lentils, oil, and expensive wrongdoing. And now the household must continue living with what it has done. Ahab tears his clothes when judgment lands. He fasts. He goes about subdued. Even here, after all this, you catch a glimpse of a man suddenly discovering that consequences are real and would like very much for that to stop. He moves heavily. He lowers his head. There is mourning in him now, though terribly late and mixed with fear. You, though, remain what the palace has long known you are, decisive. That is the unnerving thing. No wild ranting, no collapse, no theatrical confession, just the same iron line through the will, the same capacity to act where others hesitate. It made you formidable when kingdoms needed alliances, households needed order, priests needed protection, enemies needed answering. It makes you monstrous here because the same skill set can run straight over a vineyard owner and call it governance. Outside, the vines keep growing. That may be the bleakest detail of all. They do not know who owns them now. Roots take what water they can. Tendrils climb. Fruit swells in season. Birds peck at it when nobody is looking. Harvest comes because harvest does not wait for moral clarity. The land keeps producing under stolen hands, and people walking past will always know. This row belonged to Naboth. That press was his. Those stones marked his boundary. You can seize property faster than you can erase memory. So the vineyard remains beside the palace, green against stone, lovely and contaminated. A little patch of cultivated earth made famous by greed, fear, and paperwork. And from this point on, every royal meal, every message at dawn, every footstep in those corridors carries one more unseen thing with it. Naboth's blood in the dust, and the dust, as usual, gets everywhere. Years pass. Children become kings. Still, the palace never relaxes. Even the walls seem to hold old threats in their cracks. You notice it first in the mornings. Dawn has barely pushed a grey stripe over the hills when the runners arrive, dusty already, breath sour with old onions and bad sleep. Sandals slap the stone. Guards murmur. A servant hurries past with a wax tablet, trying to look invisible and failing in the dramatic way only palace servants can. The day begins not with birdsong or dignity, but with messages. Always messages. Your household is older now, richer in furniture, poorer in peace. Ahab is gone, and the manner of his going has not helped anybody relax. A battle, a disguise, blood in a chariot, dogs at the washing place. Exactly the kind of ending that makes every corridor conversation start with a whisper and end with somebody glancing over their shoulder like the plaster might testify. Royal houses love omens right up until the omens start cashing checks. Now, Ahaziah sits on the throne. Or rather, he occupies it the way an anxious man occupies a borrowed chair. You watch him receive petitioners in the audience hall where incense fights a losing battle against lamp smoke, wool, old leather, and too many men standing around pretending not to sweat. He has the family face, the family rank, and the family problem of living under a sentence everyone remembers. The throne platform looks impressive enough from a distance. Up close, it feels like a seat set directly over a trapdoor. And you are still here. Not tucked away, not silent, Not one of those harmless queen mothers who spend their days blessing grandchildren and complaining about the figs. You rise early, your cosmetics are still ground fresh. Malachite for the eyes, coal dark as wet soot, red pigment for the lips when the occasion demands a little extra warning label. A bronze mirror catches morning light, while a maid steadies the oil lamp, and another pretends not to hear the gossip she absolutely will repeat later. Age has not made you soft. It has made you exact. You know which jars of perfume have turned rancid. You know which steward waters the wine. You know which captain bows too low because he's hiding something. Palace life trains the nose as much as the mind. One sniff, and you can tell whether a room holds cedar oil, fresh bread, fear, or a man who has recently lied and thinks soap solved it. By now, the servants have perfected the art of listening through linen. Curtains breathe in the draught. Sandaled feet pause outside doorways just long enough. A cupbearer lingers too near the threshold while adjusting absolutely nothing. Women carrying folded cloth drift in and out with those blank, dutiful faces that say, "I am merely here with laundry," while their ears gather enough material to fuel 3 kitchens and a courtyard by noon. Privacy does not survive here. It gets smothered under curtains, trays, laundry, and people pretending not to listen. It died years ago, and nobody even held a funeral. In a palace, every sigh becomes information. Every delayed meal becomes rumor. Every raised voice grows legs and trots off to the gate by lunchtime. So you move through your days like someone crossing a floor full of sleeping snakes. Measured, controlled, perfectly dressed. Ahaziah tries to rule, but the house around him feels unstable, and he knows it. You can see it in the way he grips the arm of the throne, in the little flashes of temper when a messenger arrives with bad news from the hills, in the appetite for reassurance, that deeply royal craving to be told everything is under control when absolutely nothing smells under control. Then comes the fall. It happens in Samaria, high up where the air is slightly cooler and the edges of roofs and latticed openings look decorative right until they become a death sentence. One bad slip, one rotten board, one moment of misplaced footing, and suddenly your king is broken on the inside. Not dead yet. Worse. Hovering. A palace injury is never tidy. You hear the commotion before you understand it. Shouting in a courtyard, running feet. Somebody knocks over a basin. Water spreads over stone and picks up dust, hair, and one unlucky beetle. Men carry Ahaziah in with faces set hard, trying to hide how frightened they are. He is pale. He is furious. He is in pain that makes his voice come out thin and mean. Nothing strips majesty faster than being unable to stand up. He is laid on bedding that smells of wool, old cedar chests, stale sweat, medicinal herbs, and fear. Priests mutter. Servants hover. A physician with cracked fingernails and too much confidence presses where he shouldn't and earns a noise from the king that could curdle milk. Then Ahaziah sends messengers, not to the God of Israel, which you know will go over beautifully with the prophetic crowd. No, he sends to inquire of Baal Zebub in Ekron, because when your body feels like shattered pottery and your future has narrowed to fever, men reach for the familiar gods. They reach for old habits, old loyalties, old names that smell like home. It is less a theological symposium than a medical panic with incense. You can almost feel the kingdom roll its eyes. Not out loud, of course. Out loud gets you killed. But inwardly, deeply, spectacularly. because this house has spent years being accused of dragging foreign worship into Israel like muddy sandals across a clean floor, and now the injured king sends for an oracle from Philistine territory. It is the spiritual equivalent of pouring fish sauce into somebody else's stew and acting surprised when they object. The messengers don't get far. Of course they don't. Elijah appears again, because this man has an almost supernatural gift for materializing at the exact moment your household would most prefer a quiet week. You can be halfway through a minor political crisis, somebody's son is negotiating cavalry numbers, the cook has burned lentils, and suddenly there he is, hairy, furious, smelling like sun, dust, and wilderness judgment. He intercepts the royal men on the road. You picture them stopping short in the heat, robes sticking to their backs, mouths dry, wondering why every errand from this palace eventually turns into a prophetic ambush. They went out to ask a god about a sick king. Instead, they get a verbal beating in the open air. Is there no God in Israel, Elijah demands, that you go to inquire of Ekron? It lands hard, because it is not just an insult. It is a public stripping of the king's dignity. A household already under suspicion now looks desperate and faithless at the same time, which is a spectacularly bad combination. The messengers come back sooner than expected, carrying dust on their hems and trouble in their faces. Ahaziah sees them and knows something is wrong immediately. Nobody returns that fast with good news. He questions them from his sickbed, half propped on cushions, angry and sweating, lips dry, hair stuck to his temples. The room smells medicinal now. Crushed leaves, sour breath, unwashed blankets, lamp oil, and the metallic edge of illness. A royal chamber in crisis is basically a very expensive infirmary with better curtains. They repeat Elijah's words. You can feel the temperature drop. Then comes the ridiculous little detail that always tells you more than people intend. Ahaziah asks, what sort of man said this? What did he look like? Because apparently, if doom enters the room, everybody still wants a visual description like they're filing a complaint. A hairy man, they say, with a leather belt. And Ahaziah knows. Of course he knows. Everybody knows. It is the ancient version of hearing. Tall guy, wild eyes, smells like campfire and confrontation. There is only one. What follows has all the calm, good sense of a man trying to arrest a thunderstorm. Ahaziah sends a captain with 50 soldiers to fetch Elijah. Up they go toward the hill where the prophet sits, because nothing says confidence like dispatching a military unit against someone whose last few appearances have included drought, fire, and inconvenient accuracy. The captain calls up to Elijah, all official voice and borrowed authority. Man of God, the king says, come down. You can almost hear the prophet's face. Not his voice, his face. Because there is a kind of expression certain men wear before saying something that will absolutely ruin everyone's afternoon. Fire comes down and consumes the captain and his 50. Just like that. No appeal. No negotiation, no helpful de-escalation seminar. 1 minute, armed men are standing there under the sun in polished bits of leather and metal, trying to look fearsome. The next minute, the hill is a furnace, and the air smells like singed hair, hot bronze, ash, and the unforgettable horror of roasted military ambition. If you have ever smelled burnt wool, imagine that, but with screaming. A second captain goes, because apparently one catastrophe can always be improved by administrative repetition. He uses the same tone, the same demand, perhaps with a little more tension around the mouth. he too gets fire from heaven and 51 very bad final moments. By this stage, you would think the palace might pause and maybe workshop a new strategy. Perhaps a fruit basket. Perhaps not sending men uphill to command the prophet like he is a lazy contractor. But the machine of royal pride is not built for humility. So a third captain goes, and this one has enough sense to fall on his knees. Finally, a man with survival instincts. He begs for his life and the lives of his soldiers, and because basic groveling apparently succeeds where command failed, Elijah goes with him. You can imagine the trip back. The soldiers walking as if escorting a loaded jar of lamp oil through a room full of toddlers with torches. Nobody chats. Nobody clears their throat. Everybody is aware that one wrong word could turn the afternoon into charcoal. Elijah stands before Ahaziah and repeats the sentence. You sent to Ekron. You did not seek the God of Israel. You will not come down from that bed. And he doesn't. Soon enough, the sick room changes from tense to final. The king's breathing grows shallow. The heat inside him breaks weirdly. Servants change cloths and whisper in corners. The physician retreats into that deeply professional silence used by men who know they are useless but would still like payment. Then Ahaziah dies without a son. No heir, no smooth continuation, just another crack in the house. So Joram takes the throne. Another son, another shift in furniture, titles, loyalties, and dining arrangements. The royal household does this strange thing, where catastrophe and routine arrive arm in arm. One day there is mourning cloth, dust on heads, low voices. The next day scribes are drafting notices, cooks are roasting meat, and somebody is arguing over olive storage as if dynastic instability is merely a scheduling inconvenience. Joram is not Ahaziah. He has a different manner, a different energy. Less brittle in some ways, more practical in others. He removes some of the more offensive religious displays that had become lightning rods for outrage. Smart, not saintly. There is a difference. A king can rearrange symbols without changing the smell of the house underneath. You watch him carefully. A mother in a royal family does not retire from observation. You have spent too many years seeing how fast a throne can turn a man stupid. Joram enters rule with the family burdens already strapped to his back. Moab restless, prophetic hostility still simmering, memory of Ahab hanging over every policy like smoke trapped in cloth. And you remain the old center of gravity. Not officially, perhaps. Palaces adore pretending authority is tidy. In practice, men still look toward your chambers. Messages still reach you first or second. Visiting dignitaries still measure the room by your face. A suggestion from you can move through servants, stewards, and counselors faster than a formal decree because everyone knows where decisions are born and where they go to become unavoidable. Your apartments are busier now than some public offices. Cosmetics are ground in one room. Correspondence is sorted in another. A cook sends up trays of bread, figs, lentils, olives, and roasted lamb with too much cumin because somebody in the kitchen has decided every crisis tastes better aggressively seasoned. Women embroider while listening. Eunuchs carry updates. A steward presents account tallies that smell faintly of ink and panic. Outside, doves coo idiotically, as though this house is not one argument away from blood every week. At meals, nobody says Naboth's name. That would spoil digestion. But his absence sits there anyway, between dishes of stewed beans and platters of flatbread, beside bowls of pomegranates split open like decorative wounds. Ahab's death sits there too. Ahaziah's failed inquiries, Elijah's words. The future has already been announced, and now everyone must continue eating goat while pretending not to hear destiny tapping on the cup rims. It affects the way people chew, slowly, carefully, as though any careless bite might trigger prophecy. Outside the palace, the hostility never really leaves. The prophetic circles remain out there like a weather system that refuses to move on. Bands of disciples, holy men, zeal-filled watchers, all carrying the old grievances and the old stories. They remember the drought. They remember Carmel. They remember the slaughter of prophets, the support of Baal, the vineyard, the blood. Your name passes through those circles with the warmth of a knife. Even when no prophet is physically in the room, their presence lingers. A messenger arrives from the Jordan Valley, and before he opens his mouth, everyone is already bracing. A report from Gilgal, from Bethel, from some company of prophets gathered in another dusty settlement, and the reaction is the same. Shoulders tighten, eyes narrow, servants suddenly discover very important reasons to move more quietly. Nobody likes receiving mail from people who keep predicting your collapse. Joram has wars to fight and alliances to manage. Moab revolts because neighboring kingdoms can smell weakness the way flies smell fruit left too long in the sun. So there is a coalition, kings gathering, armor buckled, horses watered, leather straps checked, spears stacked. Men pretending military planning is not mostly organized dehydration with shouting. You hear it all from within the palace rhythm of waiting. Smiths hammering in courtyards, quartermasters counting grain, stable yards stinking of manure, horse sweat, damp hay, and the truly punishing fragrance of men who have been polishing gear in the heat for 6 hours. Messengers run in and out until the whole place feels like a kicked anthill with jewelry. And always, attached to these campaigns, there is prophetic interference. A king marches, and somehow a prophet appears. Water is needed, and a prophet speaks. Victory comes, but not cleanly, never cleanly, always with that sour aftertaste of being helped by the very divine power your house has spent years antagonizing. It is like borrowing money from a relative who has already written a speech about your poor life choices. The household survives for a while. That is the miserable skill of dynasties. They keep surviving longer than anyone expects, long enough for everybody to become used to the tension. Servants marry, age, and die under the same roofline. Children born into the palace grow up learning which names must be said softly. The stone floors are scrubbed, the linens are aired, festivals come and go. New officials replace old ones. Dogs sleep in shaded corners. Life insists on continuing in the middle of doom with frankly insulting determination. And you, older now, become almost more formidable because you have outlasted so much. Your hair may show silver beneath the dye and oil. Your joints may complain in the cold. You may rise from a cushioned seat with less grace than before and privately resent the entire concept of stairs. But your mind is sharp. Your posture remains deliberate. You know the names of grandchildren. You know the old allies in Tyre. You know which nobles can be trusted, which can be purchased, and which should never be left alone with a rumor. People still fear you. That matters. Fear sits in these rooms like a heavy chest nobody can move. Always there. Always in the way. But the house itself feels cursed now in the practical, daily way curses often do. Not with constant thunder, with accumulation. A prince dies. A campaign strains the treasury. A prophet sends word. An ally hesitates. A servant disappears. Someone overhears something at a gate. The cook burns the evening bread because two maids are whispering about a commander named Jehu and stop paying attention. Jehu. There is a name starting to move through the halls. Not loudly at first, barely above breath. A chariot commander, a hard man. One of those military figures who always smell faintly of horse, leather, iron, and opportunities for everybody else to die. He serves under Joram, but service in a royal court is a slippery substance. Men bow right up until the minute they don't. Ambition waits in armor all the time. The rumors gather like stormflies. A prophet has been seen near the camp. A messenger rode unusually hard and spoke to no one. Officers stood in a cluster too long. Somebody looked startled. Somebody else looked pleased. In any other household, this would be called concerning. In a royal one, it is called Tuesday. You sit at supper with lamps lit against the dark, flame wavering in polished bronze, and hear distant music from another wing. It ought to feel civilized. Instead, it feels like the kind of evening before a wall cracks. Bread tears in your hands. Oil glistens on lentils. Roasted meat cools too quickly in the night air drifting through the shutters. Somewhere nearby, a servant drops a cup and the whole room flinches. Not because of the cup, because everybody is tired of sudden noises. That is what years of prophecy do to a household. They make people jumpy. They make every hoofbeat sound personal. By now, every member of the palace lives with the sensation that the future is already coming down the road, visible or not. Some people answer that feeling by praying harder, some by drinking more, some by attaching themselves to whatever faction looks most likely to survive. Ancient court politics is basically a luxury inn full of overdressed panic. And in the middle of it, you keep dressing. You keep receiving visitors. You keep issuing instructions. You keep being seen. That is not vanity alone, though there is certainly enough ornament in your rooms to start a respectable shrine to polished surfaces. It is also refusal. Refusal to shrink. Refusal to vanish into widowhood and memory while lesser people decide your house's fate over watered wine. So each morning the pigments are mixed. The pestle grinds with a dry scrape in the mortar. Coal dust darkens fingertips. Perfumed oil is dabbed behind the ears and at the wrists. Linen is arranged, jewelry fastened. The mirror catches a face altered by years, yes, but not surrendered. Outside your chambers, the kingdom leans toward violence. Inside, a queen mother still prepares herself like a woman meeting the day on purpose. And that, in a palace full of omens, is almost its own kind of defiance. Soon enough, the rumors will harden. Wheels will rattle on the road. Men will choose sides with terrifying speed. A city will hold its breath. But for now, you live in the long, strained pause before impact, where every meal tastes faintly of iron and memory, and every corridor seems to know something before the people in it do. The house is still standing. The lamps are still lit. The painted jars are still open on the table. And somewhere beyond the palace, the story is already riding toward you. At last, the knocking comes to the gate. And you do not run. You reach for the paint box. Not because the city is calm. Absolutely not. The whole place has that horrible, prickling energy of a household that has just realized the shouting outside is not random shouting. It is coop shouting, a very specific genre. Hooves hammer the road. Wheels clatter hard over stone. Somewhere below, a guard calls for orders in the tone of a man already regretting his career path. Dust rises beyond the walls in a thick tan cloud, and the smell blows in hot and dry, mixed with horse sweat, churned earth, leather, and panic. News arrives in pieces, because bad news loves an entrance. A messenger stumbles in, breathless, face streaked with dirt, lips white with fear. Joram is wounded at Jezreel, he says. Jehu is coming. Another man runs in behind him with the kind of expression that says he would like to become furniture. The king went out to meet him. So did Ahaziah of Judah. Nobody knows exactly what happened on the road, only that it ended in blood and speed, and men not returning. That is enough. You can feel the palace freeze around the words. Servants stop in doorways holding folded linen. A steward stands with one sandal half on. Someone drops a bronze cup, and it rings across the floor like the world's least comforting temple bell. Even the flies seem offended into silence for a moment. Then everybody starts moving at once. Too fast, too stupidly. One maid rushes toward the inner rooms and nearly collides with a guard. Another starts gathering small valuables into a cloth bundle, because apparently in a military takeover, your first instinct is to protect some earrings and 3 hairpins. Men hurry toward the gate, then think better of it, and hurry away from the gate. Ancient palace panic is a beautiful thing to behold if you are not currently inside it, like watching a basket of chickens discover fire. And you are inside it. You stand in your chamber while the city below convulses, and for one beat of time nobody speaks. The shutters are open to the heat. The air smells of dust, lamp smoke, stale reed mats, and the faint mineral scent of cosmetics laid out on stone. On the table sits the paint box, small containers, ground pigment, coal, oil, little tools for making a face into an announcement. You do not order a disguise. You do not ask for a hidden door. You do not start digging for practical shoes. Instead, you sit. That, more than anything, unnerves the servants. A maid stares as though perhaps she misheard the entire concept of survival. A eunuch at the threshold looks ready to suggest flight, and then remembers who he is speaking to. You lift one hand, and the room obeys. Water, mirror, the cosmetics. If the end is climbing the stairs, it can wait while you put yourself together. There is something eerie about a woman applying eye paint while a dynasty collapses outside. Eerie, yes. Also magnificent. The little bronze mirror catches your face in a warped shimmer. Not the face of Sidon. Not the smooth face of a young bride arriving with cedar chests and foreign gods and enough jewelry to blind a village. Time has done its work. Lines at the mouth, heaviness beneath the eyes, a firmness in the jaw that did not used to need so much effort. Your maid grinds the pigment, and the pestles scrape softly in the mortar, while, outside, men may very well be dying. That contrast is outrageous. You almost have to admire it. The coal goes on dark, thick, deliberate. Malachite dust catches light at the edges. Oil smooths the skin. Hair is arranged, a head covering adjusted, jewelry fastened with fingers steadier than anyone else's in the room. It is not vanity now. It is staging. It is the final version of the same royal lesson you learned years ago. If people are going to look, give them something worth remembering. Below, the noise grows louder. The outer gate groans. Commands are shouted. Hooves strike the paving stones inside the city. Not a parade rhythm, not inspection. This is the ugly, pounding arrival of armed men who have decided that doors are a temporary inconvenience. Dust comes in through the window and settles on the sill, on the curtains, on the polished wood chest in the corner. It grits between your teeth. Someone whispers that Jehu has entered. Someone else begins to cry very quietly, trying not to be noticed and failing. You rise. The room seems to hold its breath around you. Fabric shifts over stone. Anklets click. The cosmetics give off that dry mineral smell close to the skin, mixed with perfumed oil and the sweat gathering under linen in the heat. One servant reaches for your arm. You shake her off, not cruelly, just with the efficiency of a woman who is not going to be manhandled in her own chambers by a person who was cleaning lamps yesterday. Then you go to the window. Jezreel lies below in a hard glare of afternoon light. White walls, sun-baked streets, courtyard shadows black as spilled ink, men running, men stopping, men choosing, right there in public, whether to be loyal or alive. Jehu's chariot stands out in the dust with horses lathered and violent, nostrils wide, flanks dark with sweat. The smell reaches even here. Horse, leather, dung, and the sour iron tang of fresh blood somewhere nearby. He has the look of a man who came fast and intends to keep coming. No softness, no delay. Dust crusted on his face. Beard rough. Armor marked from hard riding. The kind of expression military men get when they are half exalted and half feral, as though sleep has become optional and mercy a clerical error. Around him cluster soldiers, captains, opportunists, and that one unavoidable sort of person every coup produces. The man who was cowardly yesterday, but suddenly develops opinions once he sees who is winning. Jehu looks up. You look down. And for one hot, breathless moment, every eye in the courtyard locks onto the space between you and him. This is not a private death. Ancient royalty never gets the luxury of one. This is public, framed, window above, chariot below, hot air between. Your painted eyes catch the light. He sees them. Everybody sees them. Even the servants peering from behind columns will remember that image for the rest of their very nervous little lives. You speak first. Not a plea, not a bargain. Just one sharp insult dropped from the window like a stone. You throw down the old name of Zimri, that earlier usurper who killed his master and ruled only long enough to make disaster look efficient. It lands sharp from the height. A queen at a window mocking the man who has just torn through the city in a storm of blood and wheels. By that point, courage, exhaustion, and pride all smell the same. Hot skin, dry mouth, refusal, possibly all of them. Jehu does not answer like a wounded gentleman. Of course he doesn't. He answers like Jehu. He lifts his face to the window and calls out for allies inside. Who is on my side? Who? His voice cracks through the courtyard. Hard, loud, flat with command. For one small, terrible beat, nothing happens. Then faces appear above. Eunuchs. 2 or 3, depending on where you stand and how much dust is in your eyes. Palace men who have spent years moving quietly behind curtains, carrying messages, arranging access, seeing everything, saying little. Their expressions are unreadable in the glare. Fear? Calculation? Relief? It hardly matters now. They have heard the city choosing its future, so they choose too. You feel the shift before the hands touch you. It is in the room first, that tiny rearrangement of human intention, the way servants stop being your servants and become simply people near a dangerous object. The air itself seems to pull back. A maid gasps. Someone says your name as if that might reverse anything. It does not. The eunuchs sees you. No dignity in the mechanics of it. That is one of history's rudest habits. It remembers the pose and skips the grabbing. But the grabbing happens. Hands on arms, a violent lurch, linen wrenching, jewelry striking bone, the window frame hard against the thigh, the sudden blank tilt of open air where floor ought to be. Then you are falling. It is fast, too fast for thought, long enough for terror. The world flips in a burst of heat and white light and stone. Wind tears at the veil. The wall scrapes. Your body hits below with a crack and a thud that people in the courtyard will hear later in their sleep. Blood spatters the wall, more on the horses, more on the paving stones, bright at first, then immediately darkening in the dust. The horses rear and stamp. Jehu drives over the body. Because apparently murder is not enough if you can also add trampling. He rides across what remains with all the ceremony of a man crossing a puddle. Hooves strike flesh. Bone gives. The wheels jolt. The horses snort, dance, come down again. The courtyard fills with the smell of blood, hot dung, kicked up dust, and that awful meaty sweetness that arrives the moment a human body stops being protected by dignity and starts becoming matter. People look away. Not everyone, but enough. Even in violent times, the body makes demands on the eye. Then comes the part so monstrous, it almost circles back into absurdity. Jehu goes inside to eat. Yes, of course he does. A coup is hungry work. While your body lies in the courtyard, he enters the house, sits down and takes food. Imagine the servants setting out dishes with hands that will not stop shaking. Bread, meat, wine. Platters clinking softly in a room where everyone can smell blood from outside. The ordinary business of serving supper to a new master while the old order is still warm on the stones. There is almost something administrative about it. Terrible things in palaces are forever occurring, one room away from somebody trying to arrange a tray. He eats. The food must taste of dust. Eventually, perhaps after swallowing and wiping his hands and deciding he has made his point, he orders burial. She was a king's daughter after all. There is that much left of courtesy, or memory, or optics, to use a very modern word for an ancient problem. You cannot always leave royalty in the yard like kitchen refuse. Even butchers understand presentation. So they go out to collect you, and discover there is almost nothing to collect. Dogs have come. Of course the dogs have come. Cities have dogs the way grain has mice, and palaces have gossip. Half wild, half fed, ribs showing, ears scarred, always lurking near gates and refuse heaps, sniffing for offal, bones, anything edible or almost edible. They know the smell of blood faster than most soldiers know the smell of treachery. While men were eating indoors, the dogs were handling the cleanup with professional enthusiasm. By the time the burial party reaches the courtyard, they find only the harder parts left behind. Skull, feet, palms of the hands. Not much else. It is a horrible inventory. Brief, humiliating, final. The sort of detail that sticks in the mind precisely because it is so nasty. Ancient storytellers understood that if you want a downfall remembered, you do not make it neat. You make it visceral. You make people see the paving stones, the wall, the dogs, the pieces no one wanted to touch. The courtyard is quiet now. That is somehow worse than the noise. No more shouting, no more chariot thunder, just late-day heat pressing down on stone. Flies arriving in a dark, humming cloud, a streak on the wall, dust settling over blood. The smell turning thicker, sweeter, fouler by the minute. Not dramatic anymore, just real. A palace courtyard after violence smells like iron, dung, cracked figs, hot plaster, and death beginning its very unglamorous work. Servants stand back and cover their noses. One soldier mutters a curse. Another refuses to look at the remains directly, staring instead at the wall as if the wall might provide emotional assistance. It does not. Walls in royal houses have seen everything. They are past helping. Word moves through Jezreel quickly. The Queen Mother is dead, thrown down, trampled, eaten by dogs. You can practically hear the city passing it from mouth to mouth, each retelling stripping away a little more person and adding a little more warning. By evening, she is already becoming less a woman than a lesson attached to gore. Children will hear it. Elders will nod over it. Men who hated her will savor it. Men who feared her will call it justice with the shaky relief of people glad the danger landed on someone else. And yet the image that lingers is not the courtyard, not first. It is the window, painted eyes, arranged hair, a face lifted toward the man coming to kill the house. She could have hidden in an inner room among jars and blankets and frightened women. She could have begged. She could have wrapped herself in disorder and let panic choose her posture. She did not. She dressed. That matters, even here, especially here. Because for years she had been turned into a warning sign with jewelry. Foreign queen, dangerous woman, patron of the wrong gods, enemy in perfume. The house had loaded her name with everything it feared and hated. Imported worship, royal appetite, female authority that did not apologize for taking up space. By the end, all of that crashes down in one scene so brutal, nobody could ever mistake it for a peaceful retirement plan. And still, at the very edge of it, there is theatre. Not soft theatre, not glamour untouched by filth. Hard theatre, defiant theatre. The kind performed by a woman who knows the men downstairs have already decided what she means and chooses her face anyway. There is a dignity in that, even if it is the last dignity available. Not innocence, not acquittal, just posture, presence, a final refusal to meet destruction looking like she had forgotten who she was. Sun lowers over Jezreel. Shadows stretch long across the stones. The heat loosens at last, though the courtyard keeps its smell. Somewhere a dog still noses around and gets driven off with curses. A servant comes with water and sand to scrub what can be scrubbed. Another gathers broken bits from the sill above. Life in a palace resumes with offensive speed. Doors open and close. Orders are given. Bedding is changed. New loyalties are organized before the old blood has dried. That is the part people never put in the paintings. After the spectacle comes maintenance. Always maintenance. The wall will be washed. The street will be swept. The horses rubbed down. The dishes from Jehu's meal cleaned by somebody whose stomach turned the whole time. Tomorrow there will be more messages, more commands, more men stepping carefully around the memory of what happened here. Power changes hands and instantly wants fresh linen. But for now, the city sits in the aftershock. The window above is empty. The paint box is still in the chamber where it was opened. Little containers uncapped, powder settled in the corners, a brush laid aside, as if the hand that used it might return in a moment. Dust gathers on the table. Light fades from the bronze mirror. Outside, evening presses its dry hush over the walls, over the courtyard, over the road where Jehu came racing in. And the place where she stood is still there, high above the stone, holding the last shape of a woman who chose to be seen before she vanished. So, after all of that, you sit with the story for a minute and feel how sharp it still is. After the sea wind, the palace incense, the dust of Samaria, the cracked cisterns, the forged letters, the dead vineyard owner, the doomed sons, and that awful window above the street, certain parts of it start pressing on you harder than others. Not neat. Ancient stories are rarely neat, but clear. Clear in the way a trumpet blast is clear, or a slammed door, or the smell of smoke in a house where someone has absolutely made a bad decision. What lingers is how completely she embodied what the kingdom already feared. Foreign power, foreign gods, royal access, and no interest in making herself smaller. She is foreign. She is royal. She is tied to gods the people around her do not trust. And she is not remotely interested in becoming smaller to make everyone else comfortable. That combination is dynamite in a crown. Back in Sidon, before anybody in Israel spat her name like a curse, you could already feel the first lesson taking shape. She came from a world where throne, altar, trade and family all sat at the same dinner table, passing power around like bread. That was normal there. A princess learned quickly that marriage was not romance. It was shipping policy with earrings. It was military planning in nice fabric. It was religion, politics and perfume all packed into the same cedar chest. So when she enters Samaria, she does not arrive thinking she is stepping into a quaint little spiritual disagreement. She arrives as a royal woman doing what royal women did, bringing gods, customs, servants, influence, and expectations. That matters because by the time her name hardens into legend, you are mostly hearing her through the mouths of people who already decided what she meant. It was built by people who saw her as the full package of dangerous foreignness. Not just a woman from somewhere else. A woman from somewhere else with access, with money, with priests, with a husband on the throne. That is the sort of thing that keeps traditionalists awake at night on their lumpy little roof mats. Then the drought hits, and suddenly, this is no longer a matter of awkward palace dinners and tense looks across the courtyard. Now heaven itself feels involved. The drought is where everything gets painfully practical. Worship stops looking ceremonial when the wells shrink, the grain fails, and children start going to sleep hungry. It is not one more shelf in the palace gift shop. It reaches into weather, crops, hunger, public order, and the basic human question of whether your children are going to eat anything besides dry grain paste and disappointment. So the showdown with Elijah is not remembered as a private theological debate between professionals. It is remembered like a national emergency with terrible catering. Everybody is starving. Everybody is angry. Everybody wants to know whose God, if any, can actually keep a country alive. And in that world, Jezebel stands on the wrong side of the answer the storytellers wanted preserved. That is why she becomes so enormous in memory. She is not just associated with a bad queenly attitude. She is tied to the possibility of leading a whole people away from the God they believe rescued and sustained them. In the memory of Israel, that is not a minor error. That is civilizational disaster in eye makeup. But then comes Naboth's vineyard, and that is where the story gets horribly practical. Because it is one thing to say a ruler worshipped wrongly. It is another thing to show what unchecked power feels like at street level. Ahab wants a nicer view. Adult man, king of a nation, sulking on his bed because he cannot have the herb garden next door. Ridiculous. Also dangerous. and Jezebel steps in with the cold efficiency of someone who has spent her life in systems where authority exists to get things done. Letters sealed, elders summoned, false witnesses arranged, public piety deployed like a stage prop. One innocent man dead because the palace wanted his property. And that is the moment the whole story stops being abstract. Because now the warning is not abstract. Now everybody can see the machinery, not dragons, not thunderbolts, just paperwork, public ceremony, lying men, and a corpse. What makes Naboth's vineyard so sickening is how ordinary it feels. Sealed letters, respectable men, public ceremony, then a dead neighbor and a stolen field. It shows up with official stamps and respectable faces. It sits in the front row at the fast. It clears its throat. It uses legal process like a knife wrapped in linen. By the time you reach the later years, with sons on the throne and doom hanging over the house like storm heat that never breaks, another lesson settles in. Violence does not stay politely contained. A dynasty built on compromise, force, fear, and appetite does not suddenly become cozy because the original players got older. It ripens. Badly. The children inherit not just a throne, but the bill for everything done before them. Every meal in that palace has old prophecy sitting at the table like an unwanted relative who refuses to leave and smells faintly of funerals. That is why the final collapse feels so inevitable. Not because fate is lazy, because some houses fill themselves with consequences, one decision at a time. And then there is the window. That image survived because it does two things at once. It confirms the warning and it preserves the person. The warning is obvious enough. Arrogance goes up high and comes down hard. Royal glamour cannot stop a coup. Paint, jewels, rank, old titles, all of it can end on stone in one ugly afternoon. Power without restraint eventually meets somebody with more horses and fewer table manners. But the person is still there too. Aging queen, painted eyes, back straight, looking down at the man who has come to erase her house. That last scene does not make her innocent. It does not wipe out Naboth. It does not soften the cruelty or the blood, but it does keep her human. She is not a cartoon cutout twirling a villain mustache in a cedar-paneled room. She is a woman in a brutal world, making the final choice left to her, how to be seen at the end. And that is worth holding on to, because the people who handed down her memory hated what she represented. You can feel it in every stroke of the portrait. They made her the perfect enemy. Foreign worship, sexual suspicion, royal arrogance, violence, manipulation, feminine power used without apology. She became the warning sign nailed to the gate. Do not become this. Do not let the kingdom become this. Do not let the palace decide it owns truth, worship, land, and blood all at once. That is where the story still bites. The storytellers wanted their listeners to remember that covenant and kingship were not separate rooms. A ruler could not shrug at worship, shrug at justice, shrug at innocent blood, and expect the nation to remain whole. The God of this story is not interested in polished ceremonies covering rotten behavior, not interested in altars on one hill and judicial murder in the vineyard below, not interested in a crown that treats ordinary people like spare furniture. So, Jezebel becomes the name attached to all of that horror in one unforgettable figure. And yet, after walking through her world, you can also feel the tragedy buried under the warning label. She was shaped by Sidon, by dynasty, by palace training, by the harsh education of elite survival. She did what powerful people in her world often did. She protected her gods, her house, her authority, and her interests with all the force available. That does not excuse her. It simply places a human spine inside the symbol, so the story lands in two places at once. As warning, it is thunderously clear. You come away feeling three hard things at once. Power can outrun justice frighteningly fast. Worship can turn into costume if it never reaches the vineyard. And a throne can start eating ordinary lives before anyone in the palace admits it is hungry. And as memory, it leaves behind that one stubborn human image. A queen at the window, composed while the world below her breaks apart. That is why her name lasted. Not because she was simple, but because she was useful to remember. A caution sign painted in expensive colors. A human being turned into a lesson, and somehow both at once. Then, the shouting thins out, the hooves go quiet, and what lingers is not the noise, but the aftertaste of it. You can still feel the heat in the street below that window, dust hanging in the air, stone holding the afternoon sun like a grudge. Somewhere, a dog noses through the mess of a city that has already moved on to the next emergency, because ancient cities do not pause politely for closure. Somebody still has to haul water. Somebody still has to bake bread. Somebody is already gossiping over lentils. The queen is gone. The noise stays for a while. Then even that thins out. A few servants scrubbed blood with water that should have been used for something more practical. Sand gets thrown down. Wheels pass over the same street. Sandals slap the stones. A child gets shooed away from looking too closely, which of course guarantees that every child in the neighborhood now wants to look very closely. And above it all, the window remains. Empty now. Just a dark square cut into palace stone, high over the road, where a woman once stood in paint and jewels and fury and looked down at the end of her house. That image is annoyingly durable. The ivory inlay cracks. Cedar beams dry out, split and rot. Linen turns to dust. Perfume jars break. Bronze goes green. The plaster peels. The palace that once smelled of oil, incense, hot wax, old wine, and too many anxious servants eventually becomes rubble with opinions. Lizards live where officials once bowed. Rain gets in. Roots pry apart the floors. Time does what invading armies start, and then somehow does it more thoroughly. But the name survives. Jezebel. It keeps getting used long after the people who knew her language are gone. Long after the court gossip dies. Long after the scribes who sharpened reeds by lamplight are themselves bones under dirt. Her name starts doing work without her. You hear it tossed like an insult. Painted woman, dangerous queen, corrupter, seducer, foreign trouble in nice fabric. The kind of label people slap on a woman when they need one word to carry a whole wagon load of fear. It becomes bigger than the person, smaller too. That is the nasty little trick of reputation. It swells until it fills the room, then flattens a life into a single expression, and hers is those painted eyes, that high window, that last look. You can walk centuries away from Samaria and still find people reaching for that image. Not the shipyards of Sidon, not the trade alliances, not the palace paperwork, not even the drought, though everyone in that kingdom would have remembered cracked lips and empty jars better than eye makeup. No, what sticks is the silhouette. A woman framed above a street, composed in the final minute, defiant all the way down. Memory is rude that way. It throws out entire warehouses of detail and clings to one scene as if it were the only thing that ever happened. So the city changes. New rulers come in with fresh seals, fresh slogans, fresh soldiers, and exactly the same human talent for arrogance. Market stalls go up at dawn. Fish guts hit the stones. Flies arrive immediately because flies are among history's most consistent participants. Donkeys complain. Women grind grain until their shoulders burn. Men argue over measures of oil. Priests offer sacrifices. Officials issue orders. Farmers watch the sky. Children become adults without ever seeing the queen whose name still gets muttered as a warning. A generation passes. Then another. Nobody from the old palace can still point and say, "That was her chamber, that was her stair, that servant dropped a jar there and got cuffed for it." Memory loses texture first. The smell goes. The exact sound of a voice goes. The weight of a hand on a carved railing goes. All those ordinary things vanish so completely, it almost feels rude. The name does not vanish. It travels. It slips from court record into sermon, from sermon into rumor, from rumor into proverb. It becomes shorthand. Efficient, brutal shorthand. You do not need to explain the whole woman anymore. Just say the name, and everyone fills in the rest with inherited dread. It is the ancient version of a thumbnail so aggressive it swallows the entire movie. And still, if you stand there long enough in your mind, some of the person pushes back through the symbol. Not enough to undo anything. Not enough to wash Naboth's blood from the stones. Not enough to make the prophets wrong about the danger. But enough to remember that before a name became a warning, it belonged to someone who woke up, ate breakfast, got dressed, made decisions, trusted the wrong things, loved her house, defended her gods, and walked straight into the machinery of a world that was never going to remember her kindly. That is part of the chill here. A human life can end, and then the afterlife begins somewhere else entirely. Not in tombs, not in perfumes, not in heirlooms wrapped in linen, in other people's mouths. That is where her second life happens, in the retelling, in the narrowing, in the embellishing, in the centuries of people using her name for women they fear, women they dislike, women they want to shrink down into a warning label and pin to the wall. A whole person turned into a public hazard sign, handled with outrage, and yet the old world around her keeps sinking into the ground. Samaria does not stay young. Stone loosens, walls fall. The expensive things go first, in a way. Ivory rots, fine wood collapses, dyed cloth becomes sad little threads, and then less than that. The glamorous parts are bizarrely fragile. One season of damp, one careless rat, one leak in the roof, and your royal splendor starts looking like a failed storage problem. The earth is patient. It takes the palace back one crumb at a time. Grass pushes through cracks where messengers once ran with sealed orders. Wind moves over broken foundations. Potsherds lie in dirt, hot under the sun. Somewhere under that soil are ash, beads, bits of worked stone, maybe a smear of color that was once part of something grand. The body is gone. The chambers are gone. The dynasty is gone. The story is not gone. You can almost hear evening settling over the hill country now. Less shouting, fewer wheels, the market packing up, smoke from cook fires flattening in the cooling air, lentils bubbling somewhere, bread slapped against a hot surface, a baby crying because babies have no respect for atmosphere, the ordinary world closing over the drama like water over a thrown stone. That is how most things end. Not with trumpets, with supper. The prophets are gone. The kings are gone. The guards with spears are gone. The dogs that prowled the street are gone. The women who ground her cosmetics are gone. The men who opened and closed palace doors are gone. The cedar scent is gone. The purple cloth is gone. The wax seals are gone. The whole machinery that seemed so permanent is gone, right down to the hinges. But the image remains. Painted eyes at a high window over a hot city street. And somewhere beyond the palace ruins, beyond the vineyards and roads and weathered shrines, the ancient world keeps doing what it always did. Harvest, drought, birth, burial, trade, prayer, dust on sandals, bread in ovens, wind off the sea. One generation speaking names that the next generation barely understands, but keeps saying anyway. And so she lingers there, between woman and warning, between memory and myth, above a city that outlived her and then became dust itself. The cedar fell, the ivory rotted, the crown passed, the stones cooled after sunset and then warmed again. And her name endured long after the palace that held it had crumbled, while the evening wind kept moving over broken stone, over weeds, over old dust, and over a world that never stopped going on without her.